So when I was working as a courier last year, I had this regular route through the mountains delivering packages to remote areas. The pay was decent, and I liked the solitude. No traffic, no customers breathing down my neck, just long stretches of winding roads and forest. The only thing that sucked was the cell signal. Once I got into the higher elevations, the bars would disappear. My dispatcher always said, "If anything goes wrong, just get to the nearest town," which was about an hour away from the farthest points of my route. One rainy Thursday evening, my van started making this grinding noise about 20 miles from the nearest town. At first I thought it was just the wet road, but it got louder every time I slowed down, like metal dragging against metal. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put on the hazards, and got out to take a look. The rain was steady, not too heavy, but enough to make everything slick. The road was lined with trees on both sides, and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. There were no houses, no lights, nothing but forest and that quiet sound of water hitting leaves. I popped the hood, hoping it was something simple, maybe a loose belt or something stuck near the wheel well. I checked the basics. Nothing looked obviously wrong, but I'm not a mechanic. When I tried to start the engine again, it just made a click and died. Dead battery, maybe alternator. I pulled out my phone to call for help and, of course, no signal. I moved around a little, holding the phone up, even tried walking a bit up the road, but still nothing. It was getting dark fast, and I didn't have a flashlight, just my hazard lights and a crappy phone screen. I was debating whether to stay put or start walking when I heard footsteps behind me on the gravel. Not fast, not running. Just slow, crunching footsteps. I turned around quick, expecting maybe someone stopped to help. But I hadn't heard an engine, hadn't seen headlights. I just saw this guy coming out of the tree line maybe 30 feet back. Middle-aged, thin build, kind of hunched over. He had on a camo jacket, cargo pants, and a baseball cap pulled low. He raised one hand slightly, palm open, and said, "You okay?" I told him my van had broken down and I didn't have any signal. He nodded, kind of slow, and said, "Yeah, that happens out here." Then he looked down the road and back into the trees behind him, like he was expecting someone else to show up. I asked if he had a phone or if he lived nearby. He shook his head. "I don't carry a phone," he said, "but I got a place not far. You could use my landline. Just a short walk." The way he said it, landline, felt rehearsed, like something he didn't say often, or something he had to remember to say. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other and glancing back at the trees. I thanked him but said I might wait a bit to see if another car passed. He smiled a little but didn't move, just stood there with his hands in his pockets. Then he started asking questions, what kind of route I had, how far out I usually went, if my company knew exactly where I was supposed to be tonight. I said yeah, all our deliveries were tracked. My dispatcher had a log of all our stops. I kept it casual, didn't want to sound nervous, but something about the way he was asking rubbed me wrong. He tilted his head and said, "So someone would come looking if you didn't check in, huh?" I nodded. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's when he started fidgeting, like rubbing his thumb over something in his pocket. It made this soft clicking sound. His jacket was zipped up, but I could see the way his right hand kept twitching around in that pocket. His speech started to shift too. Less casual, more scattered. He said something about how he used to drive these roads himself, but then muttered something I didn't catch, looked down, then looked back up real quick. I started backing toward the van, keeping the door open between us. He noticed and took a small step forward, still not taking his hands out of his jacket. I said, "Thanks for the offer, but I think I'll wait in the van. I'll be all right." He nodded, like he accepted that. But he didn't leave. He just stood there in the rain, his hat dripping, one hand twitching in his pocket, eyes darting back and forth like he was waiting for something else to happen. The guy offered to drive me to his house to get some tools. He said it wasn't far, maybe a few minutes down a dirt road, and that he was good with engines. He even gestured vaguely toward the woods, saying, "Just back through there." I hesitated. It was starting to rain harder, and I was cold, wet, and still stuck in the middle of nowhere. I was about to accept when he shifted a little, and the edge of something metal poked out from his jacket pocket. It wasn't obvious at first, but when he turned just slightly toward the van, the object caught a bit of light. It looked like the handle of a folding knife. Not a tool, not something for engines, a knife. He noticed me looking and quickly stuffed it deeper into his pocket, but he didn't say anything. Just kept standing there, too close, eyes too focused. Everything about the situation suddenly changed. His smile didn't look like a smile anymore. The way he stood, not relaxed, but stiff and leaning forward like he was just waiting for something. His breathing had gotten heavier too. I looked back toward the road like I was expecting a car. Then I said, "Actually, I already called my dispatcher. They're sending a tow." That made him pause. Just a beat. His eyes stayed on me, but his posture shifted. "You sure?" he said, sounding less friendly now. "I already said, my place is real close. I got everything you'd need." I forced a tight smile and shook my head. "Appreciate it, but they're on the way. Should be here any minute." He didn't smile this time. He didn't move either. He just stood there, staring at me. Then his jaw shifted, like he was clenching his teeth, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You can't stay out here all night." I kept my voice calm, steady. "I won't. Help's on the way. I'll be fine." He took another step forward. "You don't know these woods. Ain't safe." "I'll be all right," I said again, and put one hand on the van door, ready to slam it shut if I needed to. That went on for another minute or two, him repeating himself, each time with less patience. Me standing my ground, lying just enough to make him believe someone knew where I was. Finally, without warning, he turned around and walked straight into the woods. Not back down the road, not toward any visible house. Just off the shoulder and between the trees like he knew the place by heart. I didn't move for a while, just stood there, watching the dark outline of the trees where he'd vanished. When I was sure he was gone, I climbed back into the van, shut the door, and locked it. Then I killed the hazard lights and turned off my phone screen so the cab was dark. I sat there in the driver's seat, barely breathing, trying not to make a sound. Every little crack from the woods made my skin crawl. I kept glancing at the mirrors, expecting to see him step out from the trees. 30 minutes passed, maybe more. Then I saw headlights. A single pair, approaching slow. An old pickup truck. The driver rolled down his window and asked if I needed help. I unlocked the door just enough to speak and said my engine had died. He pulled over, got out with a small flashlight and toolbox, and opened the hood without saying much else. As he worked, I stood beside him and kept glancing toward the woods. He must have noticed, because after a few minutes, he said, "You see someone back there?" I told him a guy had stopped earlier, but he gave me a bad feeling so I didn't go with him. The man nodded slowly, like he'd heard it before. "You're lucky," he said, not looking up. "There's been trouble on this stretch. Few hikers gone missing. One guy's dog came back without him." I didn't say anything, just kept watching the trees. He wiped his hands on a rag, shut the hood, and turned the key in the ignition. The van sputtered, then started. "You should head back to town," he said. "Don't break down out here again. They've been warning people." "Who's they?" I asked. "Sheriff, mostly. Says somebody might be picking off travelers. Only happens late. Only out this way." I nodded, said thanks. He drove off and I followed, not even stopping until I hit a gas station at the edge of town. I sat there for a long time before I called my dispatcher and told them I'd finished the route but had a breakdown. I didn't mention the man in the woods, didn't say anything to the police. Technically, nothing happened. The next week I requested a different route. Said I wasn't comfortable driving that stretch anymore. Nobody asked questions. They reassigned me without a word. But I still think about that guy. His eyes, the knife, the way he just disappeared into the trees like he'd done it before. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone with him, but I'm glad I trusted that feeling. Sometimes danger doesn't look like danger, not at first. It wears a smile, says the right things, and pretends to be helpful. But something always gives it away. A glance, a word, a pause too long. That was enough. And that was all I needed. When I was 18, I worked night shifts at a small diner on the outskirts of Denver to help pay for college. The place stayed open all night but barely got any customers after midnight. Most shifts I'd just clean, restock, and do homework until morning. The building was a single-story rectangle with big glass windows on the front facing the road, always kind of dim inside no matter how many lights were on. The booths were vinyl and cracked. The floor was always a little greasy. It was the kind of place that felt like it hadn't changed since the 80s, in a way that was mostly comforting. One Tuesday night around 1 a.m., the phone rang. The landline almost never rang at that hour, so it already put me on edge. I wiped my hands off and picked it up. A man with a raspy voice asked what time we closed. It was a normal question, so I told him we were open 24 hours. He was quiet for a second, then asked if I was working alone. My stomach dropped a little. I said, "Sorry?" And he followed up by asking what my name was. I didn't answer. I just hung up and stood there for a second, listening to the buzz of the overhead lights. Maybe 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, he didn't bother with small talk. He asked how old I was, if I had a boyfriend, and what days I usually worked. His tone was slower now, like he was trying to drag the answers out of me. I told him to stop calling or I'd contact the police. He paused again. Then he said, "I can see you through the front window. You're wearing a gray hoodie and jeans with holes in the knees." I turned and looked through the glass. The street outside was dead. Just an empty parking lot, a few flickering streetlights, and the shadow of the bus stop across the road. I stepped around the counter and moved toward the window, squinting through the glare of the lights behind me. Nothing. No car, no person, no movement. Still, he was right. I was wearing exactly what he described. I grabbed the phone and dialed the manager's emergency number, but it rang to voicemail. I didn't want to call 911 yet because technically he hadn't done anything. I unplugged the landline and stood there for a few seconds, thinking that would be the end of it. But my cell rang next. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then it rang again, and again, every 10 minutes for the rest of the shift, always from unknown numbers. I finally answered around 3:30, hoping maybe it was someone else. As soon as I said hello, the same raspy voice said, "I like when you wear your hair up. You should wear it like that more." I hung up, turned off my cell, and locked the front doors even though the diner was technically still open. I turned off the open sign too, just in case. I spent the rest of the shift pretending to scrub the counters while watching the window. At one point, I thought I saw someone across the street, standing just behind the bus stop bench. but when I blinked, they were gone. I never got a good look. Just a shadow that might have been there, might not have. By the time the morning cook arrived at 6 a.m., I had all the lights on, the back door double locked, and my phone turned off. He asked why everything was locked up, and I just said someone kept prank calling all night. He looked at me for a second, then walked into the kitchen like he didn't want to know more. I left without clocking out. That morning, I bought a small can of pepper spray and kept it in my hoodie pocket. I didn't tell anyone else about it, and I didn't go back to that diner after dark for a week. But when I finally did, I noticed a man sitting at the farthest booth in the corner. Gray hoodie, head down. When I brought him coffee, he didn't look up. Just said, "Thanks." Real quiet. I checked the caller ID on the landline every time it rang that night. No more unknown numbers. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing outside that window, watching me the whole time. By 4 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. I'd stopped doing anything except watching the windows and waiting for the phone to ring again. It rang at least twice every 10 minutes, always from unknown numbers. I stopped answering completely, but the sound alone was enough to make my hands shake. Earlier in the night, he'd just asked questions, personal stuff, creepy stuff, but still questions. But now, he was making threats. The last call I picked up before I turned my cell off, he whispered, "I'm gonna make you scream before sunrise." Just like that. No emotion in his voice, just a flat statement. I hung up so hard the plastic receiver bounced off the counter. I tried calling my manager again, but it went to voicemail. I left a message, short, just told him someone was threatening me and I needed help. No response. I even thought about calling the police, but I didn't know what to report. A man on the phone saying weird things? No name, no location, no visible danger. I figured they wouldn't come. I spent the next hour wiping the same counter over and over, checking the windows every 30 seconds, not because I expected to see anything, just to make sure I didn't. Every time a car passed, I tensed up. Every creak from the old ice machine made me jump. When 6 a.m. finally came, I locked up without even waiting for the morning cook to arrive. I shut off the lights, flipped the sign to closed, and rushed out the back door. The sky was still dark. The city was completely quiet except for the occasional buzz of traffic signals and the hum of early morning wind. I kept my hood up and my pepper spray in my hand. The bus stop was about 4 blocks away. Not far, but too far when you don't feel safe. I walked fast, head down, bag hugged tight to my side. I didn't see anyone else on the street, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me. I was halfway to the bus stop, near a strip of old storefronts with closed gates and dark windows, when I heard footsteps. Slow, steady, heavy. I turned and saw a man in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets, walking about 20 feet back. I moved faster. So did he. His footsteps picked up pace just enough to match mine, no more. I crossed the street. So did he. I slowed down, pretending to tie my shoe, and he did too, stopping like he was waiting for a signal. Then I ran. I didn't think. I just ran full speed toward the intersection. I heard his steps behind me, faster now, closer. My breath was short, arms shaking. I made it to the light at the corner when I felt him grab at my purse from behind. The strap caught on my arm, jerking me back. I screamed and spun around, hitting him with both hands. He was wearing a hood, face low, but I saw his teeth grit as he pulled hard on the strap again. I yanked the purse the other way and kicked at his leg. He lost balance for a second, and that's when the city bus pulled up on the corner. The driver saw us and opened the door immediately, yelling something I didn't even register. I ripped the purse from the man's grip and sprinted to the steps. I jumped on, gasping for air, turned back, and he was already gone, vanishing into the alley behind the liquor store. I stood there shaking, both hands gripping the metal pole by the door. My purse was gone. I realized the strap must have snapped during the struggle. My ID, my keys, the little bit of cash I had, it was all in there. But I was on the bus. I was safe. The driver asked if I was okay, if I needed to call the police. I told him no. I just wanted to go home. I knew I should have reported it, but I couldn't talk. My jaw felt locked, like every word would come out broken. He let me ride without paying and dropped me at my usual stop, a few blocks from the apartment I shared with a girl from my psych class. I walked home with my pepper spray still in my fist and didn't see anyone else on the street. I locked the door behind me 3 times. I didn't sleep that day. I sat on the couch with all the lights on and didn't even change out of my uniform. The next day, I called the diner and quit. I didn't ask for my last paycheck. I didn't give a reason. I blocked the number on my cell even though I knew it wouldn't matter. I told my roommate someone had tried to mug me and left out the rest. I didn't even tell my parents until months later, and even then I downplayed it like it was no big deal. But it was. It was a big deal. I still think about it sometimes. How stupid it was not to call the police the first time he asked if I was alone. How I let the phone calls go on, hoping it would stop on its own. How I tried to act like I could handle it. It started with a question about store hours, then my name, then my clothes, then my age, and it ended with him chasing me down the street at 6 in the morning. That's the part I remember the most. The moment I realized he wasn't just a voice anymore. He was a person, close enough to reach me. Now I take every strange thing seriously. Every weird question, every unwanted message, every unknown number. I don't assume anything is harmless anymore. If someone makes you feel unsafe, even a little, that's enough. That's all the warning you need. I bought a small ranch in rural Nevada 8 years ago after my divorce. I just wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere where I wouldn't have to bump into people every time I stepped outside. The kind of place where no one asked questions and no one cared what you were doing. I got exactly that. The nearest neighbor is about 1.5 miles east, and I've probably spoken to them maybe 3 times in total. My days are quiet. Chores, repairs, checking on the well pump, feeding the horses. I drive into town every week or so to get supplies. Apart from that, it's just me and the land. I thought I'd be lonely out here, but I liked it more than I thought I would. Most evenings I sit on the porch. I've got this old creaky chair and a small table for my ashtray and coffee. Sometimes I scroll through emails on my tablet. Sometimes I just read whatever's around. It's peaceful. You get to know what normal sounds like. You can tell when something's off just from a shift in the wind or how quiet the coyotes get. Last Thursday night, I was out there around 8:30. Sky was clear. Everything was still. The sun was just dropping behind the ridge, and the last bit of orange light was fading off the barn. That's when I noticed movement out past the fence. At first, I thought it was a coyote or one of the neighbor's dogs, but it was walking upright. A person. He was maybe 50 yards out, moving slow, like he was taking his time. He came from the west side, where there's nothing but hills and dry brush. No one should be coming from that direction on foot, unless something was wrong. I stood up and watched him for a second, just to see what he was doing. He stopped near the side of my barn and seemed to be looking at something, maybe the walls or the fencing. I thought maybe it was someone from the water company or a state worker checking the land. But there were no trucks, no signs, no gear. Just this man walking around like he owned the place. I stepped off the porch and started walking toward him. I figured if he was lost or needed something, he'd say so. But as I got closer, I started getting this feeling. This weird sense that something was off. His posture, the way he moved. I called out, just said, "Hey, you need something?" He didn't even flinch. Kept walking, real slow, over toward the edge of the barn, then around to the front, like he was ignoring me completely. I walked faster, cut across the gravel toward him. That's when I got a better look. He was middle-aged, maybe late 40s or 50s, wearing worn jeans, old work boots, a beige button-up shirt, and a wide cowboy hat. He looked like any other rancher around here. I was maybe 10 feet behind him when I called out again. "Sir, you on someone's land?" Still nothing. He went right up to the side of my house, walked along the wall, and stopped at the first window. I watched as he put his hands up to the glass and leaned forward like he was trying to see in. Then he pulled out a little notepad from his back pocket and started writing something. I froze there for a second, just trying to figure out what the hell was happening. I shouted louder, walked up close. "What are you doing? This is private property." He didn't even look at me. Just moved to the next window, cupped his hands again, stared inside, scribbled in that pad. I stepped in front of him, blocking the next window. "You need to tell me who you are right now," I said. He didn't respond, just turned his body slightly and moved around me to get a better angle. I was close enough to see that his notepad was full of these short lines, numbers, what looked like addresses or coordinates, but I couldn't be sure. The writing was neat. Too neat. Like he was doing something official. But there was no badge, no ID, no vehicle. Just a guy with a hat and a pad, walking around my house like I didn't exist. I kept following him, trying to get a look at the notes he was writing. He went to every window, kitchen, bedroom, even the tiny one near the back bathroom. Each time he pressed his hands to the glass, stared for a while, then wrote something down. I yelled again, told him to stop, warned him I was going to call the sheriff. That got no reaction either. Just slow, deliberate movement like he had a checklist he was working through. It didn't matter what I said. I might as well have been yelling at a post. I thought about grabbing my phone to take a picture, but I didn't want to turn my back on him. There was something about how calm he was that made me feel uneasy. He wasn't confused or lost. He wasn't scared or in a hurry. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he didn't care that I was standing right there. After the 10th or 11th window, he just walked to the edge of the house and stood still, facing the back fence. For a second I thought maybe he was done, that he'd say something or turn and explain. But instead, he took a step toward the field and started walking again, slow as ever, away from the house. I didn't follow right away. I just stood there, watching him head toward the empty fields behind the barn, toward the open land. No car, no flashlight, no gear. Just walking into the dark with that notepad still in his hand. After examining every window and door on the ground floor, the stranger didn't pause for a second. He walked around the side of the house, past my propane tank, and straight toward my workshop. I followed close behind, keeping a few paces between us, but he never once turned around. He went window by window, same routine, palms on the glass, head tilted, peering inside like he was checking inventory. My workshop is locked up tight. Heavy double doors with a steel latch and a padlock. He grabbed the handle and tugged it like he had every right to go in. Then he crouched low and looked underneath like he was checking for motion sensors or wires. He even stepped back, glanced up at the roof, then circled around and tried the back entrance. Then he made his way to the truck. My pickup was parked by the tool shed. He walked around it slowly, checked the tailgate, crouched low, and looked underneath like he was checking for tracking devices. At that point, I'd had enough. I told him I was calling the sheriff. I raised my voice this time. "You hear me?" I'm calling it in. You need to leave. I didn't care what kind of nutcase he was. If he was dangerous, mentally ill, whatever. He was about to find himself face down in the dirt if he kept this up. He stood up from the truck, brushed his jeans off, slipped his notepad into his back pocket, and without a single word, turned and walked out toward the hills behind my property. No reaction, not a glance. Just that same slow pace, like he had all the time in the world. I stood there watching him disappear into the brush, heading west where the dirt rises and the trail vanishes. After 30 or 40 feet, he was swallowed up by the dark. I waited a while, listening, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no branches snapping, just crickets and the wind. I stayed outside another 10 minutes, then finally turned back toward the house. I locked every door and window, double-checked the latches, and drew all the curtains. I went into the bedroom and took my hunting rifle out of the closet, loaded it, chambered around, and kept it across my lap as I sat down on the couch. The clock said 10:43 p.m. I turned on the outside floodlights, left the porch light on, and sat there trying to keep my eyes open. But around midnight, I must have drifted off. I woke up to cold air, the kind that bites your skin, even indoors. It was still dark out. I sat up, instantly alert, and felt it right away. The air was moving. I looked toward the hallway and saw that the back door was wide open. Not cracked, not swinging, just standing there. I grabbed the rifle and moved quietly through the house. Every room, every closet, the pantry, bathroom, under the bed. Nothing. No footprints, no damage, nothing broken. Just that open door. I closed it, bolted it, and sat back down, this time with the rifle across both arms. I didn't notice what was missing until daylight. I had a small wooden box on the desk with old family photos. Me and my ex-wife, my dad on his horse, my mom from when she was young. All of it was gone. The drawer where I kept my property documents was open, and the manila folder with my land deed was missing. I checked the filing cabinet. The envelope with my workshop's spare keys was gone. The only thing untouched was the gun cabinet. He hadn't gone after weapons or money. He took papers, pictures, keys. By sunrise, I was already on the road. I drove straight into town and walked into the sheriff's department, rifle still in the truck. The deputy on duty was a younger guy, maybe in his 30s. I told him everything. I didn't leave out a single detail. He listened without interrupting, then said this wasn't the first report they'd had in the last few months. Isolated places, no signs of forced entry, but personal stuff missing. Documents, ID, photos. He told me it sounded like a reconnaissance run. Sometimes they don't come to rob you right away, he said. They want to learn about your routines, how far you are from neighbors, what kind of defenses you've got, if you live alone. He said it could be part of a larger plan, stalking, identity theft, or worse. I filled out the report. They took copies of my license, ran my name, asked if I'd had any recent disputes or threats. I said no. No one even knew I was out there except the post office and the hardware store. The deputy recommended I install cameras, real ones and decoys, motion lights, a dog. He said having something that barked was sometimes enough to scare off the worst kinds of people. I nodded, thanked him, and drove home. That was 5 days ago. I haven't slept right since. I ordered cameras, installed them myself. Got floodlights on every corner. The rifle stays loaded. I keep my boots on when I sleep. Every night around dusk, I walk the fence line and scan the hills. I haven't seen him again, but I can't stop thinking about where he went. He didn't drive. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't speak. He just watched, took notes, and disappeared into the brush like he knew the land better than I did. And now, every evening when the wind shifts or the coyotes stop howling, I wonder if he's still out there, watching, waiting, planning whatever comes next. This happened last fall when I was driving home with my girlfriend Ellen after her night shift at the hospital. We lived in a small town about 30 minutes outside the city, and the route home took us through a patchwork of rural roads, mostly surrounded by open fields and old farms with long gravel driveways. There were some woods too, thin lines of trees separating the properties, nothing too dense. Ellen was half asleep in the passenger seat, still in her scrubs, sipping a coffee she picked up at the hospital vending machine before we left. It was around midnight on a Thursday. I remember that clearly because she'd been covering for another nurse and had stayed later than usual. We had the windows down slightly. That time of year, the air was cool, but still carried the last hint of summer. The roads were completely empty. I wasn't speeding, just cruising at maybe 50. We were maybe 15 minutes from home when I saw someone ahead in the headlights, crossing the road. I slowed immediately. It was a person, for sure. They were pushing something, looked like a shopping cart, and they were moving fast, almost like they were in a hurry. They didn't stop to look our way, didn't pause or hesitate, just hurried from one ditch to the other, dragging the cart behind them. It wobbled, one of the wheels sticking or catching on the asphalt. I couldn't make out their face. They were wearing a big coat or layers of clothing, something bulky and dark. I flicked on the high beams, but by the time we reached the spot, the person was already gone. Vanished into the dark on the other side of the road. "Did you see that?" I asked. Ellen sat up straighter and nodded, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Yeah, that was weird. They were pushing a cart?" "Yeah. I didn't see where they went." "Turn around," she said. "Let's check." I hesitated, but she looked over at me, serious. What if they need help? What if it's someone homeless or having some kind of medical issue? Ellen worked in emergency medicine. She'd seen too many people who wandered off during mental breaks or overdoses and ended up dead in ditches. I didn't argue. I found a wide driveway up ahead, reversed into it, and turned back the way we came. We drove slowly, both of us looking along the sides of the road. It wasn't well lit, no streetlights out there, just the dull wash of headlights pushing into the trees and brush. About 2 minutes later, we spotted the cart. It was sitting abandoned on the shoulder, maybe 3 feet off the pavement. No person in sight. I stopped a few feet before it and turned on the hazards. Ellen opened her door and stepped out. I kept the engine running, the headlights casting a sharp beam across the roadside grass. I leaned toward the passenger seat, watching her approach the cart. "Do you see anything?" I called out. She didn't answer right away. She bent forward to look inside, and then straightened up. "It's just trash," she said. "Old clothes, some rags, newspapers. Like someone's camped out with it? Maybe. Or they were collecting scrap. There's no food or anything. No bags, it's just stuffed with random junk." She took a few steps away from the cart and looked into the woods. I could barely see her now, just her silhouette in the headlights. "Hey," I said louder, "don't go far." She turned back toward me and waved. Then she called out, "Hello? Anybody out here? Are you okay?" Her voice echoed a bit in the empty space. No answer. She waited a second, then looked back at me. "Should we call someone?" she asked. While Ellen was investigating, I kept scanning the area around us. The road was dead quiet. Our hazard lights blinked in rhythm, casting dim orange flashes onto the bushes. My fingers were still on the steering wheel, but I was leaning forward, eyes darting along the tree line just beyond the shoulder. The nearest house I could remember passing was easily a mile or two back, and there were no other cars, no farm lights, nothing but darkness all around. Then I saw it. Movement in the low brush maybe 30 feet from where Ellen was standing. At first I thought it was just a deer or raccoon, something small rustling through the weeds. But it wasn't. A man stepped out slowly from the brush. He was thin, maybe in his 40s, clothes dirty and hanging off his frame. His arms were stiff at his sides and his posture didn't look right, like he was bracing himself. He didn't call out or wave. He just kept walking straight toward Ellen. My chest tightened. I squinted through the windshield and noticed something in his right hand. A tool or piece of metal. The way it caught the light, it looked like it could have been a screwdriver or a knife. I didn't wait to find out. I slammed my palm on the horn and leaned out the driver's side window, yelling, "Ellen, get in the car, now!" She turned immediately, startled, and the guy froze mid-step. She must have seen him too, because she backed away fast and started running toward me. The man didn't chase her. He flinched at the horn and backed up a step, then disappeared into the thick brush without a word. 1 second he was standing there, and the next he was gone, swallowed up by the woods. Ellen yanked the door open and jumped in. "Go," she said, breathless. "Just go." I hit the gas and turned the car around, tires crunching over gravel as we pulled back onto the road and accelerated away. Neither of us spoke for a minute. I kept checking the rearview mirror but saw nothing, just flashing amber lights from the hazards in the dark. After a while, Ellen said, "He came out of nowhere. I didn't even hear him." I nodded, still watching the road. "Did he say anything?" "No. He didn't even look shocked to see me. He just walked out like he was expecting someone." I gripped the wheel tighter. "That thing in his hand?" She nodded. "Something metal. I think it was a screwdriver, but I'm not sure." We didn't say much after that. I slowed down a bit once we were closer to town, but I didn't relax. Not completely. Ellen stared out the window in silence, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She wasn't the type to get shaken easily, but even she looked pale. When we got home, I parked in our driveway and turned the engine off. Neither of us moved right away. The only sound was the clicking of the cooling engine and a dog barking somewhere a few blocks away. "The cart," she said suddenly. It didn't make any sense. "What do you mean?" "There was nothing in it but garbage, ripped clothes, broken toys, like stuff someone dragged out of a landfill." I thought about the man's face, the way he moved toward her without hesitation. "It was a setup." She nodded. "Yeah. It was meant to make someone stop. Get out. That's all." We went inside, locked every door and window, and stayed up for another hour just going over it again and again. The way the man appeared, how quiet it had been, how he didn't say a word. Everything felt calculated, deliberate. The cart in the middle of nowhere, the person pushing it across a highway at midnight. It wasn't random. It was bait. The next morning, after not sleeping much, I called the local police. The officer who answered listened carefully as I explained where it happened, what the man looked like, and what Ellen had seen in the cart. I kept my voice calm, but inside I was still turning over the what-ifs. When I finished, the officer said, "We've had similar calls. Not always the same setup, but same area. Always late at night. Always something weird in the road to get people to stop. A broken bike, a suitcase, even a car seat once." I didn't know what to say. He continued, "We think someone's using these items to lure people out of their cars. Could be a robbery attempt. Could be worse. Thanks for reporting it. We're trying to establish a pattern." After I hung up, I told Ellen everything he said. She just nodded. Neither of us were surprised. We didn't drive that road at night anymore. Not unless we had no choice. If we did, we kept the doors locked and didn't stop for anything. Even now, if I see something weird on the side of the road, I think twice. I slow down. I look. But I don't stop. That night changed the way we think. We used to believe that helping people was always the right thing to do. But out there, in the dark, with no one else around, you learn fast that not everyone who looks like they need help actually does. Some people aren't looking for kindness. They're looking for an opportunity. We were lucky. That guy could have had a knife. He could have rushed her before I even saw him. But we got out. And now, we don't play guessing games in the dark. We keep driving. We call the police. And we never, ever get out of the car. So when I was working at this tech company in Portland, I started running at night to avoid the crowds and the heat. I'm not really a morning person, and I'd rather deal with cool air and empty sidewalks than jog through downtown during peak hours. I had a regular route, pretty basic, around the waterfront, past a couple of office buildings, loop back through a couple side streets and head home. But that Wednesday, I don't know. I was bored. Same scenery, same turns, same loops. I figured I'd try something different and cut through the old industrial area. It was late, past 10. Most people were home, streets were empty except for the occasional car driving by. That part of the city's pretty dead after dark. A few scattered streetlights, old warehouse buildings with rusted out signage, closed roll-up doors, broken pavement. I liked the quiet. It was kind of peaceful in a gritty way. I had my headphones in, but the volume was low. I never blast music when I'm running at night, just enough to keep rhythm. I know it's smart to stay aware. I went a little farther than I meant to. The street turned off under an overpass, and instead of doubling back, I kept going. It was a good run. Cool air, no interruptions. I usually go for 7 kilometers, but I felt good, so I pushed on. That's when I noticed another runner on the opposite sidewalk. Middle-aged guy, average build, dark blue tracksuit, clean-shaved baseball cap, earbuds in. I didn't think anything of it. People jog at night, especially in summer. I figured he lived nearby or was doing his own version of an extended route. We passed each other going in opposite directions. I nodded out of habit. He didn't respond but didn't seem aggressive or anything. Just kept his head down, focused on his stride. I continued, kept my pace. Took a right turn past a loading dock where some broken pallets were stacked up along a rusted chain-link fence. About 10 minutes later, I was heading back toward familiar streets when I caught a glimpse of movement behind me in a storefront window. Reflex made me look over my shoulder. Same guy. He had turned around and was running behind me now. That wasn't too weird by itself. Maybe he looped back like I did. Maybe we just had similar timing. But then I slowed a little to check my pace. He slowed too. I sped up again. Not a sprint, just enough to stretch my stride and get a little distance. He matched me. That's when I started really paying attention. I made a left at the next intersection, taking a smaller side street. He did the same. Another block, right turn. So did he. I crossed to the other side of the street. He did too. Still jogging, same steady stride. Like he was on a treadmill linked to mine. I stopped and pretended to check my shoe. He stopped too. Bent down a little like he was adjusting his sock or something, but his head wasn't down. He was looking at me. That's when my adrenaline finally kicked in. Like really kicked in. My legs were already tired, but my chest felt tight in a different way. I'd read stories online. People followed at night, runners attacked. I always thought I'd notice early, that I'd know when to bolt. But this guy wasn't yelling or charging me. He was just there, watching, copying. I started moving again. Normal pace, nothing erratic. Just ran. He followed. 2 blocks, same distance. Every time I glanced back, he was still there. Not trying to catch me, not dropping behind, just tracking me like a shadow. I turned again. So did he. I tested it a 3rd time. Stopped at a light and waited, watching through the reflection in the shop window beside me. He slowed too. Reached down again. Pretended to fix something on his shoe. Exact same move. That's when it stopped feeling like coincidence. It was deliberate. Like he was trying to stay just threatening enough to be noticed, but not enough to provoke a reaction. I didn't know if he had a weapon. I didn't know what he wanted. But I knew he wasn't just another runner anymore. I looked ahead. The road curved toward an old freight lot. Dark, no houses, just fences and silence. No way I was going that way. I pivoted and headed back toward a street I recognized. My pace picked up. I cut across a parking lot, trying to shake him, weaving around an old delivery truck left near a loading bay. I could hear footsteps behind me now. Steady, not running, not rushing. Just close enough to keep pressure. The industrial area that felt quiet before now felt wide open and exposed. No homes, no open stores, just blank walls and locked gates. I didn't want to pull out my phone in case he used that moment to do something. I just kept scanning the street ahead for movement, for light, for anything. I needed to get somewhere public fast. My brain ran through the area layout, and I remembered a 24-hour supermarket not far off. Maybe half a mile, if I cut through one more long block and stuck to the sidewalk. I'd seen delivery trucks parked outside it before when I passed in the mornings. I figured if I could just make it there, I'd have other people around, light, maybe even cameras. Anything that wasn't a pitch-black street lined with shuttered buildings. I didn't run. That felt like the worst thing to do, like it would tell him I knew and make him act. I kept my pace steady, like I was just another night jogger staying on a loop. I didn't look back for a few minutes. I could hear his steps again, 50 yards back. Always there, but never closing the gap. Every couple blocks the sound would fade, like he'd dropped back, and I'd start to question myself. Then he'd appear again in the reflection of a store window, or in the low hum of a foot hitting pavement at the exact same interval as mine. When I finally reached the supermarket, I saw a semi-truck parked at the loading dock with the back doors open. 3 workers in reflective vests were pulling boxes off with a dolly and talking while they worked. That sight, 3 tired guys in gloves and steel-toe boots, was the most reassuring thing I'd seen all night. I didn't slow down until I was a few feet from the automatic doors. I went inside and walked straight to the refrigerated section. Grabbed a bottle of water even though I wasn't thirsty, then made my way up front. The cashier was a younger guy, maybe college-aged, leaning on the counter with a phone in his hand. I made a casual comment about the late shift, something about it being slow. He smiled, said it usually picked up around midnight with truckers and night shift workers. While he scanned the water, I turned to glance outside. The glass gave me a wide view of the lot, the loading dock, and the sidewalk running along the bus stop. The man was standing there. He hadn't come closer. Just posted up near the shelter, not even pretending to be waiting for a bus. Just staring. No phone, no bag. Arms at his sides. Completely still. I thanked the cashier and moved slowly toward the front of the store. I wandered the aisles for a while, pretending to browse. One of the workers walked in, wheeling a hand truck loaded with cereal boxes. I watched him disappear into a back hallway. A few minutes later, the truck outside rumbled to life, and the last 2 workers climbed in. I wanted to ask them to stay, but there was no reason I could give without sounding crazy. I had no proof. Just footsteps and bad timing. I waited another 10 minutes, walked in circles around the aisles. At one point, I went to the bathroom just to kill time. When I came out, the parking lot was empty except for a few scattered cars and a flickering light pole. I checked every angle I could from the glass windows. The guy wasn't at the bus stop anymore. He wasn't across the street. He wasn't by the truck dock. I left the store but didn't go back the way I came. I took the long route, main roads, well-lit intersections, restaurants that were still open. It added at least 2 miles to my run, but I didn't care. I passed a gas station, a 24-hour gym, even a late-night diner where 2 cooks were smoking outside. I never saw the guy again, but I didn't stop checking every block behind me. When I got home, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark, listening. Nothing. No knocks, no sounds, just the hum of the fridge and the usual quiet of my building. I sat down, chugged the water, and finally let myself process how close that had felt. The next morning, my neighbor was out front watering the little plants near the mailboxes. She's chatty, always talks about crime in the area or what she hears on her police scanner. As soon as I said I'd gone for a late run, she raised her eyebrows. "You didn't go through the old warehouse district, did you?" I told her I had. She clicked her tongue and shook her head. "You need to be careful. 3 people got jumped around there in the last few weeks. All runners, late night, no witnesses. Cops think it's a setup. One guy follows them. The others wait in a van nearby." I didn't say anything. I just stood there thinking about the man at the bus stop, the way he matched my pace like he was playing a game, how he vanished the second I stepped into a crowd. That was the last time I ever ran through that part of town. I mapped new routes with streetlights, storefronts, and cameras. If it wasn't public, I didn't go there. I carried my phone in my hand from then on, took a small flashlight, wore brighter clothes. Every so often I still think about that night. Not just how lucky I was, but how close I came to being the next person whose story ended differently. All I know is, when something feels off, don't brush it away. Pay attention. Change direction. Trust the gut reaction, even if it feels like paranoia. Sometimes, that's the only warning you'll get. When I was 22, I worked as a nurse at the hospital near the Army base in Colorado. This was back in the 50s when things were different for women. I lived alone in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Kramer, and I rented one of the 2 upstairs rooms. It was nothing fancy, just a twin bed, a dresser, and a little desk by the window. But I liked it. The other tenants were quiet, mostly older folks or young working girls like me, and the place was clean and safe. On weekends, a few of us nurses went dancing at the local hall. It was our way to blow off steam after long shifts. Most of the soldiers were respectful and kind, and we never had to worry about too much trouble. I liked dancing with them. I liked the smell of cologne, the sharpness of their uniforms, and how they always walked you back to the door. But I always went home alone. That was important back then, especially in a town like ours. That Saturday night, the band had been especially good. Something about the rhythm just kept us out there longer than usual. It was past 10 when I realized the others had already left, but I wasn't worried. I caught the last bus to our side of town, like always. The ride was maybe 15 minutes, and the driver nodded when I got off near Maple and 6th. From there, it was a short walk, 6 blocks through a residential neighborhood where the houses sat close together with small fenced yards. I'd done that walk 100 times. I wasn't nervous. It was one of those warm, quiet Colorado nights. Not too hot, but with just enough breeze to make you glad you weren't inside. I kept my purse close under my arm and walked on the sidewalk, passing porches with turned-off lights and the occasional porch swing still moving from where someone had left it. The streetlights spaced every other block were dull and yellow, not too bright, but enough to see where you were going. I remember walking past the big maple tree at the corner of 3rd and thinking I should have brought a shawl. Then I heard the low hum of a car behind me. I glanced back and saw headlights creeping along. The car was maybe 30 feet behind me, rolling along at walking speed. I kept walking. I figured they were looking for a house number or maybe turning in somewhere. But the sound kept following. Tires on pavement, steady engine noise, not speeding up or slowing down. When I turned to look again, I could see it was a dark-colored sedan, maybe navy blue or black. The window on the passenger side rolled down, and a man in uniform leaned over. "Hey there, miss. Need a ride?" he called. I smiled politely, kept walking. "No, thank you. I'm almost home." The car kept pace with me. There were 4 of them inside, all in army uniforms. At first glance, they looked young, maybe my age or a little older. They all smiled like it was just a friendly offer. "Come on, it's late," one said from the back seat. "We'll take you to your door." I shook my head. "I appreciate it, but I prefer to walk. It's such a nice night." One of them laughed, low and close to a sneer. "A nice night for what?" Another said something I couldn't hear, and they all laughed again. I didn't like that sound. Not the words, but the tone. It was off. I picked up my pace. The car did too, keeping just alongside me. "Don't be like that," the driver said, still smiling. "We're just trying to be gentlemen." I didn't answer. I was 2 blocks from the house now, and my feet felt heavier than they should. I thought about ducking down a side alley, but they would just turn the car. It wasn't far, just 2 more blocks. I could get there. "You shouldn't be walking alone," one of them said. "It's dangerous." "I'm fine," I said, louder now, firm. "I'm almost home." Then the car stopped. They didn't drive off or keep rolling. It just stopped. Suddenly, sharply, tires bumping the curb. The doors opened, and before I could think to run, 2 of them were on me. They grabbed my arms, 1 on each side. I shouted, kicked at one of them, but it didn't do much. My purse dropped, spilling on the sidewalk. I tried to twist free, but they had my arms tight. I screamed again, louder this time, hoping maybe someone nearby was still awake. A window, a porch light, anything. But no lights came on. The houses were still, quiet. They dragged me toward the car, my shoes scraping the pavement. I thrashed, tried to dig my heels in, but they were too strong. The back door was open. One of the men climbed in ahead of me, the other shoved me forward, hard, and I fell onto the seat. My head hit the door frame, and the pain burst white behind my eyes. I barely felt the door slam shut behind me. The engine revved, and the car started moving before I'd even caught my breath. One of them was beside me in the back seat, pinning me by the shoulders. Another had my legs. The man in front didn't look back. He just kept driving, slow at first, then faster as the houses disappeared behind us. They drove up to the old scenic overlook in the mountains outside town. The road was winding and narrow, and the tires kicked up dust and gravel as the car climbed higher. I kept begging them to let me go, promising over and over that I wouldn't tell anyone, that I would forget their faces, their names, everything. But they didn't say a word back. They just stared ahead, serious now. The laughter was gone. The car stopped near the edge of the cliff. You could see all the lights from town below, tiny and far away. The air was cooler up there, but I was sweating from panic. One of them got out and opened the back door. They pulled me out like I was nothing. My knees buckled, but they didn't care. They dragged me across the gravel to a flat patch of ground surrounded by rocks and broken bottles. I tried to fight. I kicked and screamed and clawed at their faces. One of them punched me in the stomach so hard I couldn't breathe. I dropped to the ground, gasping. Another one grabbed my wrists and held them above my head. They took turns after that, hitting, ripping, laughing again. My legs scraped against the rocks. My dress tore. The pain came in waves, but I couldn't cry out anymore. I kept thinking about my parents, about how my mother would be pacing the kitchen, checking the clock, about how they'd think I had stayed out too late or missed the last bus. I wanted to scream for them, but there was nothing left in my throat. When it was over, one of them stood above me with a large stone. He looked down at me, his face blank, as if he was deciding whether to end it. He raised the rock over his head. I closed my eyes. Then the rock came down, not on me, but next to my ear. It cracked against the ground with a thud. Bits of gravel hit my face. I stayed still. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I didn't even blink. They stood around for a moment, then walked back to the car. I heard the engine start, then the tires crunching over the gravel. The sound faded. I kept lying there, eyes closed, body stiff. Then the sound came back. I opened my eyes and rolled toward the shadows. The car was returning. Headlights off. I could hear the engine idling nearby. I crawled, barely able to move my arms and legs, to a cluster of boulders near the cliff's edge. I wedged myself between two rocks, pressed against the cold stone, trying not to breathe too loud. Flashlights clicked on. Beams of light cut through the trees and brush. I could hear their voices again, lower now, quieter. One said, "She's still out here." Another one replied, "We can't leave her. If someone finds her..." I stopped listening. My focus narrowed to staying still, invisible, part of the rocks. They moved around for a long time, kicking through brush, calling to each other. At one point, a beam of light passed right over my shoes. I thought it was over. But they kept going, stepping just past where I was hiding. Eventually, the voices got softer, then more frustrated. One of them said something angry, slammed a door. Then the engine roared back to life. Tires spun out. Then silence. I waited. I didn't count minutes. I didn't look at the sky. I just waited until my limbs were stiff and numb, and my back hurt from the stone. Then I started walking. I didn't follow the road. I was afraid they'd come back. I went through the trees, down steep embankments, crossing under branches and climbing through brush. I held onto trees to stay upright. My dress was torn to ribbons and covered in blood and dirt. My shoes were barely on my feet. It took hours, maybe 5, maybe more. The stars were fading and the sky was starting to turn gray when I saw the edge of town. I recognized the water tower and the rail fence behind the church. I followed the alleys. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. When I reached the boarding house, the front door was locked, but the side window was cracked open. I climbed in through the kitchen. My legs gave out the moment I hit the floor. The light came on. My father was standing in the doorway. He didn't come to help me up. He just stared. "What happened to you?" he said. I told him, or tried to. My voice was hoarse and broken, and I couldn't make it all come out right. I said I was attacked. I said they were soldiers. He didn't ask how I got away. He didn't ask if I needed a doctor. He just said, "What were you thinking, walking alone that late? What will people say when they find out?" I stared at him from the floor. My whole body hurt. My skin burned with cuts and bruises. "You can't tell anyone about this," he said. "Do you understand? It'll destroy you. It'll destroy us. No one's going to believe some story like that over 4 men in uniform. I didn't answer. I didn't move. That week, I packed my things and left. I quit my job. I didn't tell anyone at the hospital why. I bought a bus ticket to another state and rented a room in a city where nobody knew my name. I worked odd jobs until I found another hospital willing to take me on. For a long time, I couldn't stand being near men. I avoided small rooms, crowded elevators, shadows in the street. At night, I would wake up gasping, the sound of gravel still in my ears. Eventually, I married. He was quiet, gentle, kind. We had children. I tried to be the kind of mother who always listened, but I never told him the whole story. This is the first time I have. I'm old now. My children are grown. My husband is gone. And that part of my life, the part I buried, keeps crawling back to the surface. Some wounds don't close. They scab over, then split open again when you least expect it. You learn to hide them. You learn how to smile, how to shake hands, how to carry on like nothing ever happened. But you never forget what it felt like. The rock beside your ear, the sound of boots on gravel, the voice that says, "No one's going to believe you." And that's why I'm telling it now. Not for sympathy, just so someone else out there knows it's not your fault, and you're not alone. Last year, I was working late on a Thursday with my colleague Daniel. It wasn't anything unusual. We were behind on a product pitch for a client and had promised a prototype by Monday morning, which meant the weekend was going to be shot. Neither of us were thrilled about it, but we were used to the grind. Around 6:30 p.m., Daniel suggested we take a break and get some caffeine to push through the night. He wanted to go to that place on Main Street, the coffee shop with the big windows and orange lettering. You probably know the one if you live around here. Always packed, even on weekdays. It was drizzling when we walked over, the sidewalks kind of slick and reflecting all the neon signs. The shop was still busy, full of college students and people on laptops, but we managed to squeeze up to the counter. I ordered a black coffee. Daniel asked for a large latte with almond milk, his usual. The barista was this kid, maybe early 20s, black hoodie, shaggy hair, didn't say much. He scribbled names and slid us the receipt. We stood off to the side to wait. I sipped at the water from the little pitcher near the straws. After about 5 minutes, our drinks came out. Mine was fine, but Daniel's had whipped cream and regular milk. They'd written Donald on the side of the cup. Daniel kind of laughed at first, like, "Hey, happens all the time." Then he took a sip, frowned, and walked up to the counter. He was polite, just said something like, "Hey, sorry, I think this is the wrong order. I asked for almond milk and no whipped cream." The barista, the same guy, looked up at him like he'd just insulted his entire family. Deadpan stare. Then he said, "That's what you ordered." Just like that. Not rude, but sharp, like he was already sick of us. Daniel stayed calm. He explained again, pointing to the receipt. The kid didn't even glance at it. He just said, "I made it right. If you don't want it, that's not my problem." It got tense. Daniel kept his tone light, tried to de-escalate. I stood back, watching. The kid didn't budge. He had this locked jaw, clenched expression like he'd just been waiting for a reason to go off. He finally turned away and started wiping down the counter like we weren't there. We both stood there for a second. I was about to suggest we just go somewhere else when a woman stepped in. Looked like a manager, or maybe a shift supervisor. Older, mid-30s, firm voice. She asked what was going on, and we explained. She didn't hesitate. Took the cup from Daniel and told the barista to remake it. He didn't say anything, just walked away like a storm cloud. The woman made the drink herself, handed it off with a quick apology, and gave us a couple of coupons for next time. Daniel thanked her, and we walked out with our drinks. But here's the weird part. The barista was standing at the back of the shop now, behind the espresso machine, just standing there, staring at us. Not moving, not blinking. Arms at his sides, hands tight into fists. We both noticed, but neither of us said anything. We walked back to the office. I made a joke to lighten the mood. Something like, "Guy probably failed a quiz earlier and took it out on us." Daniel laughed, but it didn't sound natural. We shook it off, got back to work. The hours dragged. A lot of quiet, just keyboards and mouse clicks. Around 10 p.m. we wrapped for the night and packed up. Our company rents spaces in a complex downtown, and at night we have to use the overflow parking behind the building. It's about a 5-minute walk through a service alley that runs past a few other businesses, including that coffee shop. We didn't see anyone on the sidewalk. Everything was mostly shut down. The alley was lit by a few overhead bulbs, those yellow security ones that buzz a little. The only sound was our footsteps on the wet pavement. Then, just as we were passing the side of the coffee shop, the door opened. It was the barista. He stepped out, still in that black hoodie, now with the hood pulled up over his head. He had a duffel bag slung across his shoulder. When he saw us, he stopped. Just stood in the doorway, silent. Daniel noticed first. I was mid-sentence, saying something about getting takeout, and he just froze. I looked up and saw the guy. He didn't speak, he didn't wave, just watched us. His face was totally blank. No scowl this time, no expression, just eyes locked straight on us. I thought maybe he didn't recognize us, but then he tilted his head just slightly, like a dog trying to figure something out, and kept staring. I glanced at Daniel, and we both picked up the pace. Not running, just moving. No need to escalate things. I could hear the soft squeak of his shoes behind us as we turned the corner. I didn't look back. Daniel did. When we reached the parking lot, he unlocked his car and said, "Low." He's still standing there. We turned off the main road and headed down one of the narrower side streets lined with closed office buildings and dark storefronts. The kind of place that felt totally dead after business hours. I kept checking behind us without trying to be too obvious. But there he was. Still there. Same hoodie, same duffel bag, same silent stare. Not speeding up, not falling behind. Just always the same number of steps behind, as if he was tethered to us by some invisible line. Daniel suggested we loop around the next block. "Let's see if he keeps up," he said quietly. I nodded, and we veered left, then cut right into another alley that ran parallel to the parking lot street. We walked fast, but not running. Every corner we turned, we paused to check. Still there. Always just far enough not to be confrontational, but never too far to lose sight of us. It was that precise distance that unnerved me the most. He was aware of what he was doing. It wasn't random. At one point, Daniel muttered, "He's not even pretending to be casual anymore." The guy had his head lowered a bit now, hands in his hoodie pocket, still walking in perfect sync with us. I felt my mouth go dry. We didn't speak after that. We both just started moving faster, silent agreement, heading for the cars. The final turn into the back parking lot felt like it stretched out for miles. The lot was nearly empty, maybe 5 or 6 other vehicles scattered around. The streetlights overhead gave everything a cold, greenish tint. Daniel's car was farther down. Mine was closer. We stopped walking. I turned and faced the sidewalk just as he reached the mouth of the lot. "Hey," I said, louder than I meant to. "What do you want? You've been following us for 10 blocks." He didn't say anything. just stepped forward onto the edge of the pavement, stopping directly under the light. The shadows of his hood covered most of his face, but his eyes caught the light just enough to see. He didn't blink, just stared like he was trying to memorize every inch of my face. I kept my ground for a few seconds, then took a step back. Daniel whispered, "Let's just go." We moved quickly to our cars. I kept watching the guy out of the corner of my eye. He didn't follow us into the lot, didn't come closer, just turned slightly and walked along the inside edge of the fence, stopping near the only gate out of the lot. He stood there while we both unlocked our cars and started the engines. Even then, he didn't move. As I pulled out, he took one small step back, clearing the gate. I rolled slowly past him, staring straight ahead, but I could feel his eyes locked on me. My hands were shaking on the wheel. Daniel's car followed a few seconds behind me, and I could tell from the way he moved that he was just as freaked out. I checked my mirrors until we were 3 blocks away. He never followed, just disappeared back into the shadows. The next morning we didn't even discuss it. We both just ended up at a different cafe across town. Safer, brighter, more families and old people around. I ordered black coffee again. Daniel skipped the latte. The barista smiled and called out his name correctly when his drink was ready. Later that day, I told our office admin not to order from that place anymore. Just said they got our drinks wrong and we had a weird experience. I didn't give details. About 2 weeks after that, I was talking to a client who lived near Main Street. He mentioned that the coffee shop had switched staff. Said the guy working evenings got fired for weird behavior. I asked what he meant, and he told me a few people had complained about being followed after closing time. One girl said the barista had shown up at her car, just standing by the driver's side window until she drove away. Another guy said he threatened to remember his face after a bad review. Apparently, management had tried to handle it quietly. No police reports, no big HR mess, just termination. I didn't press for more. I didn't want to know if he'd done worse or if anyone else had a worse ending than we did. It stuck with me though. Not because anything happened, but because it almost did. That whole night was just a reminder of how fast something ordinary can go sideways. One bad drink, one wrong name, one person who doesn't know how to let it go. Now I pay attention to those little signs, not just with baristas. Anyone. A forced smile, an odd pause, a glance that lingers too long. People who can't handle small frustrations usually aren't good at handling anything bigger. You don't know where their limit is until you cross it, and by then, it's too late. So when I was 28, I went to this design conference in Chicago with my coworker Sarah. We stayed at a business hotel right across from the convention center, which was convenient but not exactly in a great neighborhood. You could see a gas station across the street that had bars over the windows, and the supermarket next to it had the look of a place that had been robbed more than once. But it was fine for what we needed. We weren't there to vacation, just a couple nights for work. The first day was busy. Talks, networking, walking back and forth across the sky bridge with people in lanyards and laptops. By the time we got back to the hotel that evening, we were both wiped. I changed out of my blazer, threw on a hoodie, and Sarah wanted to grab something to snack on. Instead of using the overpriced vending machine downstairs, we decided to walk over to the 24-hour supermarket. It was just across the street, barely a minute away, even closer than the convention center. We figured it'd be quiet that time of night, probably around 9 p.m. The place had that sort of hollow silence you get in supermarkets late at night. Fluorescent lights too bright, music too soft, echoey. There were maybe 3 other customers and 2 employees that we could see. One guy was stocking canned soup. Another woman was standing behind the register talking on a headset. Sarah went to the dairy section for yogurts. I wandered into the bread aisle, just a few steps away from her, mostly to grab bagels and some cereal bars for the next morning. That's when I noticed this guy. Thin. About average height. He wore this ratty blue baseball cap pulled low over his face. He had a pack of tortillas in his hand, but he wasn't reading the label or looking at the product. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, not like in a quick glance kind of way either. His head didn't move when she moved. His body stayed pointed at the tortillas, but his eyes tracked her like he was waiting for something. I watched him for maybe 10 seconds, long enough to make sure I wasn't just misreading the situation. And then I saw him put the tortillas back, still without looking at them, and drift slowly a few steps sideways, toward the direction Sarah had gone. He picked up a box of granola. Same thing. Didn't look at it. Just held it, turned slightly, and moved again when she did. I walked toward her casually, keeping one eye on him, and said in a low voice, "Hey, that guy in the cap is watching you. Don't look. Let's just go over to produce instead." She stiffened for half a second but nodded. We left our carts and started walking together toward the fruit section. I kept checking behind us. The guy didn't hesitate. He just mirrored our shift, strolling the long way through the frozen section, like he was trying not to make it obvious. But his eyes were wrong. Too focused, too direct. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there he was, pretending to compare frozen peas but always with his body angled toward us. When we got to the produce section, he beat us there. He was standing by the apples, right in the spot we'd need to walk through to reach the main exit. He had a lemon in his hand. Just one. And he was rolling it between his palms, watching. We didn't say anything. We both just froze for a moment, pretending to look at the bananas, watching his reflection in the curved security mirror overhead. When we turned around and tried to casually move toward the dairy again, he moved too. This time sliding around the other side of the produce bins, angling toward where we'd end up if we doubled back. That was when I knew it wasn't just coincidence or bad timing. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't lost or looking for someone. He was tracking our movement, adjusting his position every time we changed direction. Not fast, not aggressive, but calculated. Calm. Deliberate. Sarah looked at me without saying a word. Her face was pale, and her hands were tight around the handle of her basket. I motioned with my head toward the back of the store. There was a door labeled, "Employees Only," probably leading to a storage room or loading dock. I didn't have a real plan, but anything that got us away from open aisles felt better than walking straight into him. We started moving. He started moving. Every time we slowed, he slowed. Every time we turned, he adjusted. It was like he wanted to stay just close enough that we wouldn't forget he was there, but not close enough to attract attention from anyone else in the store. We reached the back wall, then pretended to browse the bottled drinks while trying to peek through the little round window in the door marked "Employees Only." No one was inside, just stacks of boxes and a steel cart. The fluorescent light back there buzzed faintly. The man stopped walking. He stood just to the left of the bread aisle now, directly between us and the way back to the front entrance. He didn't have a cart, didn't have a basket, still holding that same lemon in one hand. We didn't say anything, just stood frozen by the refrigerator doors, while that door buzzed quietly behind us and his eyes stayed locked on Sarah. I realized he was herding us toward the back of the store where there were fewer people and cameras. It wasn't random. His steps were always just a beat behind ours, his route changing only after we moved. He never came too close, but he never stopped either. It wasn't until I leaned in and whispered to Sarah about the pattern that she truly understood what was happening. She stopped pretending to browse and just looked at me, eyes wide. I nodded slightly, then turned us back toward the front of the store. We walked with purpose, not running, but not stopping either. I spotted a manager behind the customer service desk near the entrance, bent over a clipboard. We approached him quickly. I kept my voice low but clear, explaining that someone had been following us through the store. Sarah stayed quiet, clutching her small shopping basket with both hands like she was holding it for protection. The manager's expression changed immediately. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't question us. He just nodded and lifted his radio, speaking into it in short, clipped sentences, asking for security to come to the front. "Just stay here," he told us, moving around the counter to stand closer. "Don't go anywhere." We nodded. The man in the cap was now at the far end of the frozen section, hovering between an end cap and a rack of gift cards. He was pretending to browse but didn't pick anything up. His eyes were still on us, and now, I think he realized something had changed. We stood by the counter and acted like we were asking about rewards cards or store coupons, anything to stay in place without drawing more attention. Sarah asked about the closing hours and return policy, but our eyes were constantly shifting over to the pharmacy side. That's where he'd gone now, right behind one of the shelves near the blood pressure machines. From there, he could see the service desk, but the staff couldn't see him unless they were looking closely. When the security guard appeared from the left side near the tobacco counter, it was fast. He had a radio in hand and a name tag on his chest. Not a big guy, but his presence was enough. I saw the man in the cap glance over, just once, and then immediately turn and walk. Not toward the front doors, not toward the main aisle. He cut hard right, disappearing down the back hallway labeled "Employees Only," the same area he'd tried to hurt us toward. The security guard raised his radio and started moving, but not at a full run. He followed him back there. For a few seconds, we just stood there, the three of us, me, Sarah, and the manager, watching the hallway as if something might come flying out. But nothing did. Eventually, the guard came back, shaking his head. "He's gone," he said. "Back door's open. No cameras on the loading dock." The manager let out a short breath and turned back to us. "You did the right thing," he said. "We've got footage of him. We'll save it for the police." They offered to walk us back to our hotel across the street. We said yes. A second guard joined us outside, and the two of them stayed with us until we were inside the lobby. That short walk across the street felt longer than the whole rest of the night. The next morning, the hotel manager flagged us down before we headed to the conference center. She looked serious, maybe even nervous. "Can I speak with you both for a moment?" she asked. We stepped to the side. She told us that we weren't the first. In the last few days, at least 3 other female guests had mentioned a man matching that same description. Thin, baseball cap, hanging around the entrance and asking weird questions. He wasn't aggressive, but he'd asked the front desk about women traveling alone, claimed to be waiting for his sister, or girlfriend, or fiancé. The story changed. The hotel hadn't thought much of it until they saw the security report from the supermarket. They had now given everything to the police. Local patrols were increased around the conference center for the rest of the week. Sarah and I stuck together, walking to events, eating lunch, even using the hotel gym at the same time. We told our supervisor what had happened, and she made sure someone always knew our schedule. It felt like overkill at first, but then again, it hadn't taken more than 20 minutes in a grocery store for something to start going very wrong. I learned later, after we got home, that it's common. Predators target business travelers, especially women. We're in unfamiliar places. We don't always know where the exits are. We're tired, distracted, polite. Easy to follow without it seeming strange. That man didn't try anything flashy. He never said a word. He didn't even get close. But his behavior was precise, controlled, and it was clear. He had done this before. I still think about that night sometimes. How normal it all felt at first. How nothing in the store made it feel unsafe until we were already halfway through it. That's what stayed with me. The fact that he waited, moved slowly, always kept his face down. How we almost brushed it off as bad luck or awkward timing until it was too obvious to ignore. Always trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Even when it's quiet. Even when it's public. Even when you want to believe it's all in your head. 'Cause people like him. They know how to wait. They know how to blend in. And they only need you to doubt yourself long enough to make a mistake. So when I was 26, I worked the night shift at a private care facility for Alzheimer's patients outside Phoenix. 12 residents under my watch from midnight to 8 a.m., and I was the only staff member in the building. The place sat in a quiet residential area, surrounded by a brick wall about 8 feet tall and metal fencing above that. There were cameras on every corner of the building, covering all entrances, exits, and pathways. The inside had motion sensors and automatic lights that kicked on in the hallways when anyone walked through. Everything was locked from the inside, and the front doors had a magnetic lock that required a key card to open. I'd been doing the job for about 8 months and had gotten used to the rhythm of things. Most nights were quiet. I did hourly rounds, checked in on each resident, made sure no one had fallen or wandered out of bed, and passed out meds if they were scheduled. The place didn't have medical emergencies often. A few of the residents were mobile, but most needed assistance or used walkers. Dorothy Williams in room 3 liked to sit near her window and talk to herself in the early evenings, but usually fell asleep before midnight. Robert Chase in room 7 stayed in bed all night, didn't speak much anymore. Dementia had taken his words away years ago. That Monday night had been uneventful. I did my rounds at 1 and again at 2:30. Everyone was asleep. Dorothy was curled up under her pink blanket. Robert had kicked his sheets off again, like always, so I fixed them. The hallway lights flicked on when I walked through, casting a sterile yellow color across the white linoleum floors. I made some tea from the staff kitchen and scrolled on my phone in the break room between rounds. It was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. Around 4 a.m. that Tuesday, I finished my rounds and was heading back toward the staff area when I heard pounding on the front door. Not a knock, more like a fist slamming against the glass over and over. It echoed through the lobby. I went up and looked through the peephole, expecting to see maybe a delivery driver or even a confused relative who got the time wrong. There was no one at the door. The pounding continued, though, even as I looked out. I opened the security feed on the tablet mounted next to the desk and checked the front camera. Still nothing. No person. Just a dark sedan parked across the street with no visible plates. The headlights weren't on. It was just sitting there with the engine off. I didn't recognize it. The neighborhood didn't usually have traffic at that hour. The house across the street was dark. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the sound I was hearing, because the pounding hadn't stopped. Then Dorothy appeared beside me, standing there barefoot in her nightgown. Her gray hair was a mess, and her hands trembled like they always did. "He's been out there an hour," she said without looking at me. "Why won't he leave?" Her voice was soft and confused, and for a second, I thought she must be sleepwalking or having one of her delusions. But she was staring straight at the door. "Dorothy," I said, "what are you doing up? Did you hear something?" "That man," she said, pointing toward the door. "He won't stop. I don't like him." Her room was in the opposite wing of the building. No windows in her room faced the front. There was no way she could have seen the front entrance from her bed, not even if she'd opened her door and walked halfway down the hallway. The layout just didn't work like that. She had to pass the break room, then the med station, then the supply closet before the lobby came into view. And she wasn't wearing her shoes. "I think we should go back to your room," I said. But my eyes were still on the tablet screen. The camera hadn't picked up a single movement, but the pounding was still there. Louder now. Like whoever it was knew I was standing on the other side and wanted to be let in. Dorothy's fingers gripped my arm, tight. "He said he wanted the lady with the curly hair. That's me." My stomach dropped. Her file mentioned delusions. Yes. Sometimes she thought her husband was still alive. Sometimes she thought she was a little girl again. But never once in 8 months had she spoken about someone watching her or trying to find her. Never anything like this. I eased her back toward the hallway, past the med cart. The lights overhead clicked on as we moved. "Dorothy?" I said carefully. "What else did he say?" She looked up at me, wide-eyed like a child. "He was whispering through the door. I heard him clear. He knew my name. And he knew your name too." Then she added, "I didn't tell him, I swear." I didn't say anything. I just walked her back to her room. The hallway was quiet. Her bed still had the sheets pulled back from when she got out. I helped her in, made sure she had her blanket, and turned her TV onto the Weather Channel. She liked to fall asleep to that. Then I stepped back into the hallway and walked quickly to the front again. The pounding had stopped. I checked the front camera one more time. The sedan was gone. The street was empty. The knocking stopped for 15 minutes. I stood near the nurse's station with the security tablet in one hand and my phone in the other, watching the live feeds, flipping through angles, side entrance, back hall, delivery access. Everything was still. Then, just as I started to think maybe the man was gone for good, the pounding came back, louder this time. He wasn't knocking anymore. He was hitting the door hard, using his full weight behind each strike. The door shook with every blow, and I could hear the glass flexing. Before I could move, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned, and Robert Chase was standing there in the middle of the hallway. He didn't have his walker. He didn't have his slippers. He'd walked all the way from room 7 without help. His hospital gown was half-buttoned and hanging off one shoulder. He looked straight at me and grabbed my forearm with both hands. Then he said, clear as day, "Don't go to that door. That man is dangerous." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, blinking at him. Robert hadn't spoken more than a word or two in weeks. Every nurse note for the past month said the same thing. Aphasia progressing. Minimal speech. Mumbling. He was barely able to chew solid food some nights. But now he was looking right through me, eyes focused and alert, holding on to me with more strength than I expected. I didn't answer him. I just nodded and walked toward the lobby window. The curtain was pulled, but I peeked through the edge. There was someone out there. He was hunched over at the door, back to me, trying to wedge something into the crack where the two metal doors met. His hands moved fast, like he'd done this before. Then he froze and looked up at me through the glass. We locked eyes for a second, and he jerked back. His face went dark in the shadows, but I caught the shape of it. Narrow cheeks, unshaven jaw, hoodie pulled tight. He stepped back from the door and then vanished into the night. Gone. I called 911. I told them a man had attempted to force entry, that he was still in the area and possibly armed. Then I turned off the hallway lights and used my key card to lock the main door from the inside. Double secure. I moved the med cart in front of it just in case, and walked Robert slowly back to his room. He didn't say anything else. He sat on his bed like nothing happened. "Try to sleep, okay?" I said. He nodded and looked past me at the blank wall. I checked on Dorothy too. She was asleep again. I don't know how, but she was curled up with her blanket pulled tight under her chin. Her Weather Channel was still playing quietly. I closed her door gently and waited for the police. They showed up 20 minutes later. 2 cruisers, 1 detective. They looked around the front area and found the pry marks on the doorframe almost immediately. One of the officers pointed them out with his flashlight, then held up a small tool he found on the ground near the bushes, thin, metal, and worn at the edge. A lockpick. "You said he tried to force the door open?" one officer asked. I nodded. "Twice. First at 4, then again maybe 40 minutes later. They asked me to pull the footage. I showed them the front camera, which finally caught something. A man in a hoodie pacing near the gate around 3:50, then again closer to 4:30. He kept his face down, hands in his pockets, walking in slow circles on the sidewalk. The sedan was parked across the street. Same car. No plates. I hadn't imagined it. "We had a robbery tonight," the detective said. "Pharmacy over on Miller and 8th. Guy took a bunch of oxy, benzos, some ADHD meds too. Broke the back window with a wrench and ran. We think he's on foot now." I told them about the facility's medication inventory. Everything stored in a locked cabinet behind the med station. The officer asked if anyone else knew the layout of the building, if I'd noticed anything suspicious in the days leading up to tonight. I hadn't. Everything had been routine. The detective nodded slowly. He was probably casing the place. "We found shoe prints in the landscaping near your side entrance. Looks like he circled the building a few times. You were lucky you didn't open that door." They suggested I notify the facility administrator and recommended adding bars to the pharmacy cabinet, motion-activated alarms on the side exits, and better perimeter lighting. They said they'd increase patrols in the neighborhood for the rest of the week. "Sometimes these guys come back," the detective said before leaving. I didn't sleep the rest of the shift. I stayed in the staff room with the tablet in front of me, flipping through camera angles every few minutes. Nothing else happened. The sky turned pale orange around 6. Residents started waking up at 7. I helped them with breakfast and made sure no one wandered near the lobby. But the whole time, I kept thinking about Dorothy and Robert. A few days later, I gave my notice. I told my manager I needed a change. Night shifts were too much. I wanted something with less stress. She didn't ask questions. She just said she understood. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. About how 2 people with severe cognitive decline both warned me about a danger they shouldn't have been able to know about. Dorothy's room didn't have a view of the front. Robert had barely spoken in over a month. The layout of the facility didn't allow for either of them to see the man or the door. But somehow, they knew. People told me not to think too hard about it. That dementia is unpredictable, and sometimes patients say strange things that seem meaningful but aren't. "Coincidence," one nurse said. "They just got lucky." But it didn't feel like luck. It felt specific. It felt deliberate. I don't believe in anything mystical. I never did. But after that night, I started wondering if there's something deep in the brain, some old instinct, that still works even when everything else is broken. Something that knows when danger is near. Something that doesn't need eyes or memory or language. Whatever it was, I listened. And I still think about it. Especially when I pass by quiet buildings late at night. Especially when the street is empty and still. I always check the door, always glance at the cameras, always wonder if someone's watching from the dark, and whether someone inside already knows. I rented a cottage in Vermont last October for a weekend away from city stress. The place sat off the main road, surrounded by thick woods about 30 minutes from the nearest town. The owner said it was perfect for disconnecting from everything. It was a small, square cottage with a wood stove, no internet, and barely 1 bar of cell service if I stood at the edge of the deck. I arrived Friday evening, right before the sun dipped low behind the trees. The gravel drive crunched under my tires, and the porch light flicked on from a motion sensor as I stepped out. The front door was unlocked, just like the owner had said it would be. I brought in my bag and groceries, turned on the heater, and started a pot of pasta on the stove. The cottage smelled like cedar and faint mildew, but not in a bad way. More like a reminder that no one had been there for a while. I opened the back windows to air it out and lit one of the candles I'd brought. The kitchen table faced a wide window looking toward the woods. I didn't see any neighbors or roads from there. Just pine and maple trunks stacked close together. It was dead quiet except for the wind. No cars, no people. After dinner, I unpacked my stuff and set my phone on the windowsill to catch a little signal. I didn't expect much, and that was kind of the point. Around sunset, I was finishing the dishes when I heard a creaking sound from the front porch. I figured it was just the old boards shifting with the cold air. But it happened again. Heavier this time. I wiped my hands and walked toward the front window. The outside light hadn't triggered, which was odd. I moved quietly and leaned closer to the glass, trying to see past the reflection. That's when I saw a shape. Somebody was standing near the tree line across the clearing, just on the edge of where the grass met the woods. Not walking, not doing anything, just standing there. It looked like a man. I couldn't make out his face in the shadows, but the shape was clear. Broad shoulders, still posture, arms at his sides. The second I leaned forward, he moved. Quick and smooth, he stepped back behind a tree, out of sight. I stood there a minute, waiting for him to reappear. Nothing. I looked for movement, listened for footsteps, but the forest was quiet again. I turned on the porch light and stepped out onto the deck, scanning the trees. It was too dark now to see much of anything. I stayed out there a minute longer, then locked the door and pulled the curtains. After that, I checked every window and door. Everything was shut. The locks worked. The sliding door in the back clicked into place. It was probably just a hunter, I told myself, or some local walking a trail I hadn't seen on the map. Still, I couldn't shake it. The way he moved, fast but calm. Not like someone who was lost. More like someone who didn't want to be seen. I kept the curtains drawn and turned on a few more lights, then sat down with a book and tried not to think about it. The rest of the night passed without incident. I went to bed just after 11 and left a lamp on in the main room. The next morning, it was colder. I stepped out onto the front porch with my coffee to get a better look at the clearing. The grass was still wet from the night dew, and the trees were silent. But something caught my eye on the steps. A line of wet, muddy boot prints leading up from the bottom stair. I looked at my own shoes, dry and clean from staying inside. These weren't mine. The tread was thicker, wider, and the prints were still damp, like they'd been left hours ago. I counted 6 steps, stopping just short of the door. No other marks. No prints turning away. It was like someone had walked up, stood there for a while, then left without backing down the stairs. I walked the perimeter of the house and didn't see any other signs. No tire tracks. No footprints around the back. I circled again just to be sure. Still nothing. I went back inside and locked the door behind me, then double-checked the windows. I even opened a few to check the screens. All intact. I made a mental note to bring something inside to wedge under the doorknob that night. As the day went on, I tried to keep busy. Went for a walk along the gravel road, did some reading, cooked again. But I left all the curtains closed. When the sun went down, I turned on every light in the house and stayed away from the windows. I kept the porch light on. The boot prints didn't fade by the afternoon. They dried into perfect brown shapes, like someone had pressed them in just for me to see. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps on the porch. I froze where I was sitting, held my breath, and listened. One slow step, then another. Then the sound of the front door handle turning. Slow, like someone testing it. I didn't move. I waited a few seconds, then got up, walked quickly to the hallway, and flipped the porch light switch. It flicked on with a snap, casting a pale yellow light across the steps. The handle stopped turning. I didn't wait to see a face. I called out loud, "I'm calling the police!" The steps creaked once more, then silence. I stood there for a full minute, listening hard. Nothing moved. Eventually, I crept to the window and looked out. No one was there. The yard was still. The trees weren't moving. I didn't see anything at all. But just over an hour later, I caught something in the corner of my eye while lying in bed. I turned toward the window and saw a shadow move past the second-floor glass, slow and tall, just the top of a head and shoulder. Not fast like before. This one lingered, blocking the faint light from outside, just moving past, like someone was walking the length of the cottage, watching through the glass. I barely slept that night. Every time the house creaked or the wind moved something outside, I flinched. I stayed in bed with my shoes on, phone clutched in my hand, light still on. I kept thinking about the shadow at the window. It hadn't knocked. It hadn't tried the glass. Just passed by slowly, like it was waiting for something. At one point around 4 in the morning, I thought I heard the crunch of leaves behind the cottage. But when I looked out the back window, there was nothing. At sunrise, I went out with the flashlight still in my hand. The air was cold and wet. I checked the front steps first. No new prints. Then I walked around to the back, toward the small detached shed I hadn't used yet. The lock was broken, lying on the ground a few feet away. The door hung half open. Inside, everything looked like it had been rummaged through. Tools on the floor, bags unzipped, shelves picked over. A chainsaw was missing from the rack on the wall. I stepped back slowly, scanned the woods again, then spotted something in the soft mud near the tree line. Tire tracks. A vehicle had pulled around the back, probably sometime during the night. The tracks were fresh, still wet. I didn't follow them. I called the local sheriff's office, gave them my location, and explained what happened. A deputy named Morrison arrived a little after 9 a.m. He was middle-aged, quiet, wore a heavy coat and gloves. He walked the property slowly, taking pictures of the prints in the shed. Then he asked if I'd noticed anything unusual the night before. I told him everything. The figure in the woods, the footsteps, the door handle, the second-floor window. He didn't seem surprised. After checking the tracks in the back perimeter, he asked if I'd be willing to follow him about a quarter mile into the woods. I grabbed a coat and went with him, keeping close as he walked a narrow path between the trees. About 15 minutes in, we came to a small clearing. It wasn't visible from the house. In the clearing was a crude campsite, tarp strung between 2 trees, a folding chair, a small fire pit with blackened wood. Scattered nearby were plastic bins, a sleeping bag, and what looked like electronics, clothes, and tools. I recognized the missing chainsaw near the base of a tree. Morrison pointed out a duffel bag stuffed with items still in their packaging, kitchen appliances, headphones, boots. "Stolen," he said. from about half a dozen places around here. He explained they'd been investigating a string of break-ins over the past month, all targeting seasonal properties and rentals. The thief usually waited until the place had been empty for a while, then used the woods to approach unseen. He parked off-road, hiked in, and stashed stolen goods in his camp until he could load them up later. They didn't know how long he'd been near the cottage, but based on what I saw, Morrison guessed several days. Back at the house, he checked the locks again and took more notes. He asked me to leave everything as I found it, in case they needed more evidence. Before he left, he told me the man probably expected the place to be empty, and my early arrival threw off his plans. He wanted you gone, Morrison said. If he couldn't scare you out, he'd wait for a better opportunity. I asked about the chainsaw. Could have been for forced entry. Could have been a bluff. Either way, it's not the kind of thing you want someone carrying around at night. By afternoon, more deputies came to remove the stolen property from the woods. They packed up the tent and gear, took statements, and told me they'd let me know if anything else came up. I stayed inside, blinds shut, phone fully charged, bag already half packed. I didn't bother cooking dinner, just ate what was left of my snacks and waited. The next day, they called. The man had been arrested 2 towns over trying to force his way into another rental cabin. Someone spotted his truck parked near a trail and called it in. Officers found more stolen property in the vehicle and camping gear in the back seat. It was the same guy. They showed me his mugshot later. Mid-30s, beard, sunken eyes, wearing a gray coat. He looked like a guy you'd pass on a city street and forget instantly. But not when you're alone in the woods. Morrison said they believed he'd been living off-grid since late summer. Maybe longer. No fixed address, no job, no family they could track down. Just moving from county to county, living in tents, stealing what he needed. When things got too hot, he moved on. They found receipts from hardware stores, maps, fuel cans. He knew what he was doing. I cut my trip short after that. Packed everything up and left before noon. The owner said I could stay, even offered a refund, but I just wanted to be back on the highway. It didn't matter that he was in custody. The place didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt exposed. I kept looking in the rearview mirror all the way out of the woods. Back in the city, I started checking crime reports before booking anywhere rural. I don't care how nice the photos look or how peaceful the description sounds. I want to know how far the nearest neighbor is. I want to know if there have been break-ins, if the doors are solid, if there are cameras. People talk about getting away from it all like it's some kind of luxury. But isolation isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's the reason someone chooses your place instead of the one down the road. Because you're alone. Because nobody's watching. Because if something happens, help isn't minutes away. It's an hour, if you're lucky. It's easy to romanticize the quiet. But quiet also hides the sound of footsteps. And if someone's desperate enough, silence is the first thing they look for. I was assistant manager at a grocery chain for 12 years when this happened in August 2018. That Tuesday, I was scheduled to close, and most of the staff had already gone home by 10, except Rose from the deli and Mark, our overnight security guard. Rose had volunteered to stay late and do a deep cleaning of the refrigerated display cases, which wasn't unusual for her. She took a lot of pride in her work, didn't complain, and often signed up for extra maintenance shifts even when no one else wanted them. We had a system for that. Whoever stayed late had to check in with security at least once every 30 minutes, just to make sure they were safe and accounted for. I'd see her walking past my office now and then, carrying buckets or rearranging metal trays from the case. Everything was normal until just after 12:30 a.m. I had just finished a call with a vendor when I heard heavy, rushed footsteps outside my office. I looked up and saw Rose pushing through the door, her eyes red and glassy like she'd been crying. I stood up immediately. She was panicked, stuttering, pointing behind her down the main aisle near frozen foods. "There's a man in the store," she said. "He was just standing there." I looked up and he was gesturing, like waving me over. Mark was at the security desk, so I called him on the radio and told him to meet me by produce. I had Rose sit down and take some water while I checked the cameras. Nothing. We went frame by frame across all the aisles that were visible from the cameras. Nothing showed up. Just her. We rewound back 15 minutes and saw her walking to the deli, moving boxes, cleaning. No sign of any other person. No dark corners. No doors opened. Nothing. Mark and I walked the entire store together. Freezers, dairy, backstock, loading dock, even the walk-in fridge. Every door was still locked and alarmed. No sign of forced entry. No alarms had been triggered. Nothing was stolen. It was completely quiet. We checked the perimeter and then came back to the office where Rose was still sitting. She looked pale, still shaken. I told her we didn't find anything, and that it might have just been a shadow or a trick of the lights. The store is lit with high white fluorescence, and when you've been working 12 hours, they can start to mess with your eyes. She didn't argue. She nodded slowly and said she must have imagined it. Mark walked her back to the deli, and I figured that was the end of it. 30 minutes later, it happened again. She came back, not running this time but moving fast, glancing over her shoulder. Her voice was higher now, panicked again. She said he was back, same man, same aisle, just standing still, half turned toward her, watching. No expression, no movement, just standing there. She said he hadn't made a sound, didn't approach, just pointed. This time, we didn't just check the cameras. Mark and I did a full walkthrough again, but slower. We cleared every aisle, checked every shelf, every stock room, even the restroom hall. I climbed up onto the storage racks and dry goods to get a view from above. Nothing. No signs of any tampering. No extra items. No missing ones. And again, the cameras showed nothing but her. We could see her reacting to something. She looked up and backed away fast. But in the video, there was nobody else there. Just empty tile floor and shelves of cereal. That was when I decided she needed to go home. Whether it was stress or something else, she didn't need to be here another minute. I told her to clock out early and get some sleep, and that I'd follow up with her later in the week. She hesitated, almost protested, but I told her it was fine and we'd cover the rest. She took her things and left through the front entrance with Mark walking her to the door. The next morning, store manager Susan reviewed the footage herself. She confirmed it. Every camera angle, every timestamp, just Rose, Mark, and me. Not a single frame showed anyone else. The building was sealed. All exit alarms were functional. The interior motion sensors showed only 3 bodies on the grid all night. Over the past month, Rose had come to my office a few times after her shifts, usually just to cool down before heading home. She never made a formal complaint, but she hinted at feeling unsafe, especially when working evenings. One time, she mentioned a guy who kept hovering near the deli while she was slicing meat. He didn't do anything overt, just stood there watching too long. She said he made her skin crawl. A week later, she told me he came back again and muttered something as he walked by. Something about her being easy to follow. That one stuck with me. We checked the footage then too. There was a man who matched her description. Tall, gray jacket, shaved head. He didn't break any rules, just loitered longer than usual. No reason to ban him. I asked if she wanted to report it formally. She said no. Just a bad vibe, she told me. But after that, she seemed different. Jumpy. She flinched when someone came around the corner too fast. She kept the deli knife holstered even when she didn't need it. Susan and I had already started discussing how to get her time off. She'd been pulling long hours, sometimes doubles, and took on too much overtime. Always said she was fine, but we could see it wearing her down. Our district didn't have great policies for burnout back then, but we had access to a small employee assistance program with counseling. We decided to call her in the following Monday, offer a few weeks of paid leave, and set up a referral to a therapist. It was late in coming. We both knew that. We thought the man she saw that night was a projection, something her mind created under too much pressure, an accumulation of fear and exhaustion. We figured she needed rest. We didn't think it was anything more than that. The next morning, a little before 8, I was in the office when my phone rang. It was Rose's husband. He didn't say anything for a moment, just breathed into the receiver. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. He said Rose had passed away during the night, collapsed in their bathroom. Paramedics said her heart stopped. She was only 38. No prior medical issues, no warning signs, no history of heart disease. The ER doctor said it was cardiac arrest brought on by acute stress. The official report came later. Autopsy confirmed it. Elevated catecholamines, cortisol levels through the roof, classic markers of an adrenaline-fueled breakdown, panic-induced heart failure. Her body had essentially short-circuited under psychological pressure. Her husband said she hadn't slept, pacing, sitting by the window. She kept telling him about the man in the store, that he was watching her, that he was going to hurt her. She said he wasn't real, but at the same time, she was convinced he was. He knows where I live, she said. She locked every window twice, moved furniture in front of the back door. He tried to calm her, even offered to drive her to the hospital, but she refused. Said she just needed a shower, needed to clear her head. She never came out of the bathroom. The funeral was 2 days later. Small gathering. Some co-workers came. Susan cried through most of it. I stood in the back, feeling like I didn't belong. Her husband spoke briefly. He said she was the strongest person he knew, and that she gave everything to her work. Too much, maybe. He didn't say it with anger, but it hung there. I felt it in my stomach like a weight. Back at the store, the air changed. People walked softer. No music played for a week. We held a meeting with staff, acknowledged what happened. Management issued new protocols, mandatory stress management training, anonymous reporting systems. We upgraded the camera systems, doubled security shifts during off hours, but none of it felt like enough. I went back through the footage from that night one more time. I watched Rose walk past the seafood counter, bucket in hand, head down. I watched her pause, lift her eyes, freeze. Her posture stiffened like she'd seen something. She dropped the cloth she was holding, but the camera showed nothing. Just aisle lights reflecting off linoleum. I should have seen it. Not the man, but the way she moved. The tension in her arms. The way she looked over her shoulder before every turn. I thought she was just tired. Everyone's tired in retail. That's what I told myself. But this wasn't fatigue. It was fear. Sometimes I wonder if there was someone there. Someone the cameras didn't catch. A glitch in the blind spots. Or someone who knew where to stand. But then I think, does it matter? If she believed it, if her mind made it real enough to kill her, then what's the difference? I still think about that night. About the way she looked when she came into the office. About the way I told her to go home and rest, thinking that was the right call. I've been in this job too long, seen too many things. But Rose Rose was different. She was the first time I saw stress break a person from the inside out. She died of something nobody could see on a chart until it was too late. We work in places that push people too hard for too little, where everyone's replaceable, where fear gets laughed off because you're just supposed to deal with it. If I had said one different thing, if I'd made one different call, maybe she'd still be here. But I didn't. And now she's not. When I was 31, my wife Sarah went to visit her sister in Chicago for a week, leaving me alone in our 2-story suburban house for the first time in years. I work as a programmer, mostly remote, and often stay up late reviewing documentation or tweaking back-end systems. Being alone didn't bother me at all. Honestly, I was kind of looking forward to the silence. No constant background noise from the TV. No long phone calls on speaker. Just a quiet house and my own routine. That Tuesday night, I was at the kitchen table finishing up some code reviews and merging branches. It was close to midnight. I had a cup of coffee going cold next to my laptop, one of the under-cabinet lights buzzing faintly above me. The dishwasher had finished its cycle about an hour earlier, and now the whole house was quiet. That kind of silence you only get when everything's shut down. HVAC off, no neighborhood dogs barking, just stillness. Then I heard a creak. A single quick shift in the ceiling above me. Not like something fell, more like the subtle pressure of weight on old wooden boards. I paused, tilted my head toward the sound, and waited. Nothing followed it. The heating system had always been a bit ancient, and our second floor tends to groan and pop when it's adjusting to temperature shifts. I chalked it up to that. Still, it stuck in my mind for a minute or two. Sarah usually made a big deal about checking out any strange noises. She'd walk through every room until she found a logical explanation. I never bothered. I'd grown numb to the way the house settled, how it shifted and talked. But this time I glanced up at the ceiling and just listened. Then went back to my screen. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Only this time, it was more drawn out. Several creaks in a row. Not random. Not popping from a heat duct or frame. It sounded like someone moving. Slow, careful steps coming from the direction of our bedroom upstairs. The hair on my arms stood up. I muted the video call I'd left running, pushed my chair back slowly, and listened. My office is directly under the master bedroom, and I could clearly make out weight shifting across the floor up there. I waited, barely breathing. My phone was charging beside me, so I grabbed it. Didn't call anyone, didn't text, just held it. I walked to the drawer near the fridge where we keep an old flashlight. It's one of those long ones, metal, heavy, something that could double as a bat if needed. I clicked it on once, made sure it still worked, then headed for the stairs. I didn't call out, didn't say hello or who's there or any of that. I moved slow up the stairs, stepping on the outside of each tread to avoid the squeaky centers. Halfway up, I paused and scanned the second-floor landing with the flashlight beam. The door to our bedroom was open about halfway, just how we usually left it. But something about the angle of the light hitting the floor gave me pause. There were marks on it. Faint, smeared tracks. When I reached the top, I kept to the wall, moving toward the guest room first. The door was open wide, and the bed was untouched. I scanned around. Everything looked normal. I was about to turn away when I noticed the window. It was cracked open. Not wide, just enough that the latch didn't catch. The curtain was pulled halfway into the opening like it had gotten caught by the wind. That wasn't right. I clearly remembered closing every window in the house after Sarah left. It had rained briefly Monday night, and I'd gone room to room to check them all. I stepped closer. There were wet leaves stuck to the inside of the sill, and below that, just faintly visible on the wood floor, were thin, muddy prints. Not full shoe shapes, more like partial impressions. Someone had been here. Inside. Recently. I turned off the flashlight and listened again. Nothing. No movement. Just silence. But my hands were shaking now, and my breath had picked up. The tracks didn't lead back out the window. They led across the hall, toward our bedroom. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and stepped carefully into the hallway. I checked every room one by one, starting with our bedroom. Nothing was touched. The closet door was closed, just like always. I opened it anyway and swept the flashlight along the floor, then up to the shelf. Nothing out of place. I did the same with the hallway closet, the bathroom, and the guest room again. I even checked inside the linen cabinet. Every drawer, every corner. Still nothing. The attic access panel in the ceiling hadn't been disturbed, and there were no signs of forced entry on any of the doors. I walked the full length of the upstairs hallway again, slower this time, checking the door frames and window locks. All latched, all solid. Nothing looked broken or tampered with. Downstairs, I went room by room again. The front door was locked. The back sliding door, also locked, had its wooden dowel still wedged in the track. The kitchen window was shut tight. I even checked the garage and the basement storage room. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been moved. It was like whatever had happened, if anything had, left no other trace. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I carried the bat up to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with my back to the wall. I kept the flashlight and my phone next to me and watched the hallway outside the cracked door. Every single noise that night felt amplified. Every shift in the walls, every pop of the ducks, every car that passed outside. I didn't sleep. I just sat there for hours, replaying the sound of those footsteps in my head, waiting. By morning, I knew I wasn't going to let another night go like that. I called a security company at 9 a.m. sharp and scheduled a full home system install for that afternoon. Motion sensors, window alarms, and cameras for every entry point. I wasn't interested in peace of mind anymore. I wanted proof. I also drove straight to the hardware store and bought new deadbolts, rekey kits, and a box of long screws for the strike plates. Every door in that house got an upgrade before lunch. The techs showed up around 3 and finished by sundown. I watched everything they installed, made sure the app worked, and walked the perimeter with them twice. After they left, I tested each alarm and alert from my phone. Everything was solid. I still didn't sleep great that night, but I felt better knowing every door and window would trip an alert if touched. I kept the bat beside me anyway, just in case. The next several days felt like I was living inside a ticking clock. I'd wake up every hour to check the cameras. I'd get a ping from the motion sensors outside, then watch 10 minutes of footage just to confirm it was wind or a squirrel. I turned on every outside light after sunset, set the alarm the moment I came inside. I even covered the guest room window with a thick towel until I could get blackout curtains. I started checking local crime stats in my area. Nothing major, but then I dug deeper and found out there had been a string of break-ins 3 blocks over. 2 houses on the same street had been hit within a month. No one was hurt, but both were daytime entries. Police suspected it was the same person. My report got added to the file, but they admitted they had no leads. One of the detectives told me over the phone that most burglars avoid occupied homes. That didn't help. When Sarah got back on Sunday night, I picked her up from the airport and didn't say anything until we pulled into the driveway. I didn't want her to think I was overreacting, but I also didn't want to downplay anything. Once we were inside, I told her everything. The footsteps, the muddy prints, the open window. She went quiet, walked upstairs with me, and stood in the guest room for a long minute before saying anything. "Did you call the cops that night?" "Next morning," I said. "They took a report, but there wasn't much to do. Nothing stolen." I showed her the footage from the week. The app had stored a bunch of random motion alerts. Trees blowing, cars driving by, some neighborhood cat. She scrolled through them, pausing now and then to study a frame. I told her how I hadn't slept properly since Tuesday, how I'd been on edge the whole time, jumping at shadows. She said she believed me, but I could tell she wasn't convinced it had been a person. That changed exactly 1 week later. It was around 11 p.m. when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the kitchen window camera. I was already in bed, Sarah asleep next to me. I slipped out, went to the hallway, and checked the app. A short clip was waiting. I tapped it, expecting another false alarm. But there it was. Something large and slow climbed up onto the outside sill of the kitchen window. It paused, nosed around, then pushed its front paws against the glass. A second later, the window nudged open an inch. The old latch hadn't clicked all the way after the last cleaning. I watched, completely frozen, as the shape squeezed its body halfway in. It was a raccoon. Fat, slow, and deliberate. It dropped into the kitchen sink, sniffed the counter, then knocked over an empty granola bar wrapper. After a minute of rummaging, it climbed back out. The footage ended there. I stood in the hallway, just staring at the screen. I couldn't decide if I wanted to laugh or punch a wall. All that tension, all that fear, every second of lost sleep. For this? I woke Sarah and showed her the clip. She laughed. Not in a mean way, but in that relieved, incredulous kind of way. I didn't laugh. Not right away. We checked the guest room window again that morning. Same style latch. Loose if not clicked hard. It wouldn't take much for a determined animal to get it open. And the muddy prints. The leaves? They lined up perfectly. We bought better window locks that afternoon. Reinforced ones that couldn't be jimmied from the outside. I kept the security system running. I didn't even consider canceling it. What I learned from that week had nothing to do with raccoons. It was about what happens to your mind when you're alone in a house that was never truly quiet before. You start noticing every little sound, every unfamiliar shift in the shadows. You go from logical to paranoid without even meaning to. And it doesn't matter if the threat turns out to be nothing, because the moment you believe it's real, that's all it takes. When I was 28, I worked for a consulting firm that sent me all over the state for client meetings. That Friday night in November, I was driving back from a 3-day project in a small town about 4 hours away. The rental SUV had been acting up all week, making weird noises and jerking occasionally. It would stall for a split second when I slowed down, then lurch forward again like it had hiccups. The check engine light had blinked once, then went back off. I figured it was nothing, just a glitch. The gas station attendant in the last town had warned me about frequent breakdowns on this stretch of Highway 47. Said something like, "If your car's already acting funny, maybe don't push it." I should have listened and stayed overnight, but I wanted to get home to my girlfriend. We'd had a fight before I left, and I didn't want to give her another reason to be pissed. The rain was coming down hard, and my GPS showed 2 more hours of winding country roads ahead. I remember thinking this was exactly the kind of situation my dad always warned me about. Dark, remote, middle of nowhere, alone. The roads were slick and narrow, bordered by dense woods on either side. No streetlights, barely any reflectors. Just the yellow glow of my headlights cutting through the rain and the occasional pair of distant deer eyes staring back. I didn't see another car for nearly 30 miles. Just trees, soaked road, and a low mechanical hum that didn't feel right. Every now and then, the SUV would shudder, like something was catching in the transmission. My knuckles were tight on the wheel. I kept adjusting the radio, switching between static and old country music, just to distract myself from the steady unease creeping up. About an hour from the nearest town, I passed a wooden sign that said, Whitaker County Line. After that, the road narrowed even more. There were no more gas stations, no more stores, just empty farmland and wet pavement. The windshield wipers were barely keeping up. It was hard to see more than 30 feet ahead. My phone had no signal. I figured that would change once I hit a hill or got closer to civilization. Still, I kept glancing at the signal bar, just in case. Around midnight, the engine started sputtering worse than before. I felt it stall mid-curve, and I immediately veered to the shoulder before it completely cut out. I sat there with the hazard lights blinking, rain pelting the windshield, engine dead. I tried restarting it. The ignition clicked, lights flashed on the dash, but the engine wouldn't catch. Tried again. Nothing. The battery wasn't dead, but the engine wasn't coming back. I sat back in the seat, stared out at the rain. My phone still had no signal, which wasn't surprising given how remote this area was. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, watching the rain and debating whether to start walking. The longer I sat, the more it started to feel like I shouldn't. I couldn't explain it. Just didn't feel right getting out. I was dry, the doors were locked, and the nearest anything was too far to risk it. The occasional tree branch creaked under the wind. Somewhere off in the woods, I heard something rustle, but it didn't sound close. I was still debating what to do when I saw the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. Blue and red. A police cruiser pulled up behind me, and I felt a wave of relief. Help had arrived. A man in uniform got out and approached my window. I rolled it down halfway and started explaining about the breakdown. He didn't say anything at first. Just nodded, glanced at the SUV, then looked back at me. His uniform looked official, but something about it wasn't quite right. No badge number. The name patch just said Deputy with no actual name under it. His boots were muddy, not like he'd just stepped out of a cruiser, but like he'd been walking through woods for a while. He didn't ask for my license, didn't even look at the plates or the rental sticker. I said, "I think it's the transmission. It's been acting up all week." He kept looking at me, then finally said, "You been out here long?" I told him maybe 20 minutes. He didn't respond, just stared through the window for a moment, then said, "Pop the hood." I hesitated. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it was too flat, too clipped. I hit the hood release, and he walked around to the front. I watched him in the mirrors. He didn't really inspect the engine, just stood there for a while with the hood up, then came back and tapped on the window. I rolled it down again. He said, "Yeah, transmission's out." I asked if there was a tow truck nearby or if I could ride into town. He looked up the road, then back at me, like he was thinking. "Town's about 12 miles, he said. "You'll freeze walking. Get in the cruiser. I'll drive you." I didn't move. Something about the way he said it. It wasn't a suggestion. It was quiet in the car, but I could hear the way he said, "Get in," like it was already decided. I glanced at the side mirror. His cruiser looked legit, but I couldn't see the dash or the license plate clearly. Rain had fogged the back window. I asked if he could call it in, maybe get a tow sent. He said, "No signal out here," which matched my phone, but still. Then he added, "You'll want to get moving. It's not a good place to be stuck." His eyes didn't move from mine. He wasn't blinking much, just standing there in the rain, waiting. Still not asking for ID. Still not offering any. My door was locked. His hand hovered near the handle. I said, "I can wait for another car." He said, "You won't see one." Then, without turning, he glanced up the road again. Just a flick of the eyes. "They don't come down this way anymore." He didn't explain who they were. The officer didn't introduce himself or ask if I was okay, which seemed strange. Instead, he demanded to see my license and registration in an aggressive tone that felt more like an interrogation than assistance. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at his cruiser, but the rain distorted everything. His flashlight beam stayed locked on my face, blinding me. I raised a hand to shield my eyes and said, "Can you stop pointing that at me?" He didn't respond, just repeated, "License, registration." I reached slowly for my wallet, moving carefully. He stood close, just behind the edge of the door frame, so I couldn't see his face clearly, just a silhouette and a soaked uniform. I handed him my license but didn't touch the registration. I said, "It's in the glove box," waiting for him to tell me to grab it. He didn't. He just stared at the card in his hand, then said, "Step out of the vehicle." His tone was clipped, flat. I didn't move. "Why?" "There's been reports of stolen vehicles in the area," he said. "Yours matches the description. Step out." It didn't make sense. I was driving a silver rental SUV, same generic model I'd seen a dozen of that week. I asked, "What exactly are you saying I stole?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not going to argue with you. Out of the vehicle, now." His flashlight moved down, angled through my window like he was checking the inside of the cabin. I noticed then the badge area on his chest was completely blank. No emblem, no name, just Velcro with nothing attached. The belt looked wrong too. No radio, no body cam, just a holster and a few pouches that looked oddly spaced. And behind him, his patrol car, now that I looked closer, was older, boxy, dented around the front fender. It didn't have the county markings I was used to seeing on real cruisers. I said, "What department are you with?" His head tilted. "Don't play games with me." "Then show me a badge." He stepped in closer, too close, flashlight still trained on my face. I squinted and leaned away. He said, "Give me your keys. Vehicle's being impounded. You can talk to someone at the station. I'm not handing you anything until I know who you are." His hand moved down to his belt, resting near what looked like a sidearm. That's when I knew I wasn't wrong. My heart started pounding, but I didn't show it. I nodded once, then slowly reached down with my left hand and clicked the lock switch. He didn't react, probably thought I was complying. Then I grabbed the door and slammed it shut as hard as I could. The lock clicked automatically. His flashlight bounced off the glass. I turned the key. First time, click, nothing. Second time, the engine turned over. He started yelling, hands smacking the glass, trying to open the door handle, but it was locked. I threw it in drive. Tires spun on the wet asphalt for a second before gripping. The SUV lurched forward, and I floored it. In the mirror, I saw him sprinting toward his car. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I drove fast, hands tight on the wheel, every muscle locked. The road curved and twisted, rain still pouring, and I kept checking behind me for headlights. I didn't see any, just trees, empty road, and a growing sense of nausea in my chest. I passed one closed gas station, then another. No cell signal. Nothing but woods and wet road. Finally, a green highway sign appeared through the fog. Hollow Creek, 9 miles. I kept driving, didn't let off the gas until I hit the edge of town and saw lights from a diner and a 24-hour gas station. I pulled into the first lit building I saw, parked in front of a grocery store with a faded open sign and sat there for a full minute, breathing. Then I drove another half-mile to the town's police station. A squat brick building with a single cruiser parked out front. I walked in, still soaked, and told the first person I saw what had happened. The desk sergeant listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed and leaned back. "You're not the first," he said. "Not even this month." I just stood there, dripping onto the tile floor. We've had reports going back 6, maybe 8 months. Same stretch of 47. Someone flagging down broken down vehicles, claiming to be law enforcement. It's always at night, always in the rain, and no one's ever gotten a plate number. I asked if they'd caught him. He shook his head. Abandoned cruiser was found in a field last week, stripped of anything traceable. Homemade decals, dummy lights, no prints. He asked me to write down everything I remembered. I sat there for an hour filling out forms and answering questions. They offered to call someone for me, but I just asked for the name of a motel. That night, in a stale-smelling room above a laundromat, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the blank badge, the flat voice, the way he stepped closer when I questioned him. I kept hearing him say, "They don't come down this way anymore." Like it was a warning, or maybe a threat. It's been almost 2 years. I've taken that road once since then, in broad daylight, just to see the spot. There's no mile marker, no signs, just a patch of cracked asphalt and a gravel shoulder. Nothing that says what happened. Nothing to prove I didn't imagine it. But I didn't. I know I didn't. I still drive rental cars for work, still take long trips through unfamiliar places. But I keep a second phone now, one with offline maps and emergency SOS. I also keep a printout of state police ID formats in my glove box. And I never, ever pull over for flashing lights in the middle of nowhere again. I don't know what he wanted, but I know I wasn't the first, and I'm scared I won't be the last. So when I was a junior in college, my buddy Jack invited our group to spend spring break at his family's ranch in the Colorado mountains. The property was huge, about 1,000 acres of mostly undeveloped land, with just a small cabin his dad had built a few years earlier. There were 4 of us total: me, Jack, Dave, and Tommy. We planned to do some target shooting, fishing, and just hang out away from campus for a week. The drive up was about 6 hours. We packed rifles, beer, and more snacks than we needed. By the time we arrived that first evening, the sun was already dipping low behind the tree line. The cabin wasn't fancy, just one room, a wood stove, bunk beds, and a little kitchen area. But it was enough. The first few days were exactly what we'd hoped for. Shooting cans off fence posts in the mornings, fishing in the little pond nearby, grilling burgers, and drinking beer around the campfire at night. It was a real break from everything. No cell signal, no classes, just us messing around in the woods. But something started to bother me. The second night, just as we were winding down by the fire, I thought I saw someone standing way back by the trees. Just a dark shape between the trunks, outside the circle of light. I blinked, leaned forward, and it was gone. I didn't say anything. Maybe I was just tired or buzzed. The next night, it happened again. We were a few beers in. Dave was telling a story about a professor who got arrested for shoplifting, and I looked up and saw it again. Same spot. Still. Just standing there. Too far to make out details, but it looked like a person. I stood up, walked toward the edge of the firelight, squinting. But it disappeared again. I told myself it was a shadow, or my imagination. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like someone was actually out there. When I finally brought it up to the guys the next day, they didn't take it seriously. Dave laughed and said I'd probably just had too much to drink. Jack said sometimes hunters or hikers pass through the property. It's open land, he said. As long as they don't mess with the cabin, who cares? I let it go. Maybe they were right. We'd been there 4 days when Jack brought up going coyote hunting. Said his dad had mentioned they'd been messing with livestock in the area. None of us had ever hunted coyotes before, but we were game. We loaded up our rifles and headed out around mid-afternoon. Jack led the way down one of the old logging roads that cut through the property. We hiked about 2 miles before stopping near a wide clearing. Jack said it was a good spot to post up and wait. The plan was to spread out a little, sit quiet, and see if any coyotes wandered close. The sun was low by the time we saw movement across the field. A small pack, maybe 4 or 5, moving along the edge of the trees. Jack signaled for us to get ready. We crouched into position, rifles up, barely breathing. Then, out of nowhere, we heard the first shot. It wasn't from us. The bullet zipped overhead, close enough I could hear it snap through the air. We hit the dirt instantly. Another shot cracked from the tree line behind us, then another. Branches snapped above. Someone was firing at us, and it wasn't random. These were aimed. Real bullets. I crawled toward a downed log for cover, heart pounding in my ears. "What the fuck is happening?" Dave shouted from somewhere to my left. Jack yelled, "Don't move! Stay low!" The shots kept coming, maybe 4 or 5 more in total. Then silence. No footsteps. No voice. Just dead quiet except for the ringing in my ears and the rustle of wind through the grass. We stayed still for what felt like forever. Finally, Jack crawled over to me, his face pale. "We gotta get out of here. Now." We moved fast but low, staying in the brush as much as we could. No one said a word on the hike back. We immediately hit the ground and started crawling toward better cover behind some fallen logs. Dirt kicked up around us as more shots cracked through the trees. The sound echoed, impossible to trace. Whoever was shooting had distance, elevation, and a better line of sight. I saw bark explode off a stump 2 feet from Tommy's head. He was screaming now, not hit, just panicking. We couldn't yell back. Talking felt like painting a target on yourself. We just motioned to each other and kept crawling until we reached the edge of the clearing, where the trees were thick enough to break visibility. There was a short pause, like the shooter was reloading or just waiting. Jack was the first to make a move. He looked at us, nodded, and sprinted. We all followed. We didn't think. We just ran. The road back to the cabin wasn't a straight path. We had to cut through the brush, down a slope, and jump a shallow creek. The bullets started again just as we broke the tree line. It was wild firing, not aimed anymore, but still terrifying. Branches cracked. Leaves burst above our heads. Whoever was out there wanted us dead. We didn't stop running until we reached the cabin. My chest was burning. My legs almost gave out. We burst through the door, slammed it shut, locked it, and started flipping the lights off. We kept low, crawled around, and peeked through the slats in the blinds. No sign of movement. No sound except our own breathing. Dave was shaking so badly he dropped his rifle when he tried to load it. Tommy was sitting on the floor with his head between his knees. Jack didn't say a word. He just started throwing stuff into bags. Ammo, food, water. I grabbed the keys off the hook, and we all piled into Jack's truck without even bothering to pack everything. We drove with the headlights off for the first quarter mile. Once we hit the gravel road, Jack floored it. We didn't say anything the whole drive back to town. No one even turned the radio on. We stopped at the first gas station we saw and used the payphone to call the sheriff. He didn't ask many questions, just told us to stay put and wait for him to meet us there. It was almost midnight by the time he showed up. He had another deputy with him, and both of them looked like they'd just been pulled out of bed. Jack gave them the whole story. No one laughed. No one acted like we were overreacting. The sheriff just listened, took down our info, and told us we'd go back in the morning to take a look. The next day, just after sunrise, we drove back up to the ranch. Sheriff brought 3 other guys with him, all in uniform, all armed. We stayed behind them as they moved toward the cabin. It looked fine from a distance, but once we got closer, the damage was obvious. Bullet holes in the walls, the window cracked, and muddy boot prints on the porch. Inside, it was worse. Our bags had been opened and tossed around, food wrappers everywhere. The cooler was empty. Jack's dad's toolbox was untouched, but my sleeping bag was missing. So was a box of .308 ammo we'd brought for target shooting. Nothing else had been taken. No cash, no electronics. Just a few things that would be useful in the woods. The sheriff crouched outside by the porch steps. He pointed at some tracks in the dirt. "Not fresh," he said, "but someone's been here a while." He led us about 100 yards into the trees where we found the remains of a camp. Just a fire ring, some torn canvas, and a pile of animal bones. Another 100 yards beyond that, there was another one. Smaller, cleaner. He found 3 in total, all scattered along the edge of the property. The sheriff's guys spent the day sweeping the area. They found more signs, trash, more tracks, a tarp hidden under a log pile. But no person. Whoever had been living out there had packed up and vanished. The sheriff's theory was that it might have been a poacher or someone squatting. Maybe ex-military. Maybe just someone who didn't want to be found. He said it wasn't uncommon in the mountains. People disappeared out here all the time, sometimes because they wanted to. But what didn't make sense was the shooting. If it had been a hunter, he said, they wouldn't have kept firing once we ran. There was something else going on. They set up trail cams and posted notices about the investigation. Jack's dad came up later that week with a contractor and started planning out a fence. None of us stayed past that second night. We went back to school and tried not to think about it. But I did. A lot. The search officially ended 2 weeks later. Nothing new was found. No one claimed the camps. No signs of a squatter. No more gunshots reported in the area. The sheriff wrote it up as an unsolved case. Aggravated assault, likely connected to illegal hunting. No suspect. No motive. Just a warning to be careful out there. Jack's dad put up security cameras all around the cabin and posted no trespassing signs every 100 feet. But it didn't feel like enough. Not to us. I never set foot on that property again. None of us did. Jack said his dad sold it a few years later. They never went back after that. Every now and then I still think about that last night. About how we were just hanging out, drinking, laughing, then suddenly running for our lives. I think about the fact that the guy didn't stop shooting, even when we were clearly fleeing. I think about the missing sleeping bag, the specific ammo taken, the camps hidden just far enough away, the bullet holes in the walls. I don't know what we walked into up there, but I'm sure of one thing: whoever that was, they'd been watching us. Probably the whole time. It happened last spring when I was a sophomore in college. My roommate Chloe and I had this Friday night routine where we'd go to this Thai restaurant downtown that we absolutely loved. The place wasn't fancy, but the food was solid and cheap, especially with the student discount. The only issue was parking. Downtown was packed, and the free lots near the restaurant were always full by 6. So we'd usually leave the car at the campus library, 6 blocks uphill, and walk the rest of the way. That meant we had to pass through a neighborhood with narrow sidewalks and houses that hadn't seen paint in decades. There were barely any working streetlights, so once it got dark, Those few blocks always felt off. I used to tell Chloe we should just suck it up and pay for parking once in a while, but she'd just laugh and remind me we were both eating on ramen budgets. That Friday night started like the rest. We parked at the usual spot, right under a busted-out lamppost behind the library, and made our way toward Maple Street. I remember passing the same tilted mailbox on the corner, the one with duct tape wrapped around the post. We were halfway down the block when we saw someone had left their garbage bins out even though trash day had already passed. Stuff like that always made me a little uneasy, but I kept those thoughts to myself. Chloe was talking about some guy in her bio lab who wouldn't stop flirting with her, and I was only half listening, just trying to keep an eye on where I was stepping because the sidewalks there were always cracked or uneven. We were about halfway to the restaurant when I noticed a dark sedan parked on the side of the road. It was the only car on the block, engine off, headlights off, just sitting there like it had been parked for hours. There was a man behind the wheel. At first I thought he might have just been using his phone, but then I realized he wasn't looking down. He was staring directly at us. His eyes didn't move. He looked to be in his 40s, buzzed hair, and he had this cold, fixed expression. His face didn't twitch or shift at all. No phone, no distraction. Just eyes locked on us through the windshield. I slowed down without even realizing it, just a step or two. That's when Chloe looked up and saw him too. She didn't say anything, but her grip tightened on my arm. When we were about to pass the front of the car, the guy rolled down his window halfway. I expected him to ask for directions or say something stupid, but what came out didn't make any sense. It was low, maybe mumbled, but I caught the words, "pretty walk," or "make you walk." I'm not sure. His smile, if you could call it that, was tight and crooked, like it didn't belong on his face. Chloe didn't say a word. She just tugged on my sleeve and picked up the pace. I followed. Then we heard it. The slam of a car door. We didn't stop. I turned my head just enough to see the man step out of the sedan. He wasn't rushing, just closing the door like he had nowhere else to be. That's what made it worse. How casual it all was. He wasn't yelling or threatening or running. He was just walking, slowly, in the same direction we were headed. I kept my voice low. "He's following us." Chloe didn't answer, but I could feel how tense she was. Her arm was locked through mine, fingers gripping the sleeve of my jacket. We turned the next corner, off Maple and onto Dunlin, which ran toward the restaurant district. That street was even darker, fewer houses, more overgrown hedges and empty porches. I told Chloe not to run, not yet. If we started running and he had a weapon or something, we'd be stuck with nowhere to go. We passed an old rusted-out fence with vines growing through it. I remember that because the vine brushed against my leg, and it startled me bad enough to trip for a second. Chloe kept tugging me forward. We didn't speak again until we could hear the sound of his shoes behind us. They weren't fast, but steady. Confident. Just a dull crunch of gravel and sidewalk and heels on pavement, matching our pace exactly. Then he spoke again. I didn't turn around, but the voice was louder now, closer. "Where you girls headed?" That was it. Nothing else. Not a yell, not a threat. Just that same low voice, casual, almost like he knew us. Chloe finally whispered, "Let's run." So we did. We bolted. Chloe's flat slapped the pavement so loud I thought it'd echo for blocks. I didn't look back, just ran until I saw the lights from the restaurant signs ahead, spilling yellow and blue onto the sidewalk. We made it to the corner where the district started. Bars, cafes, noise, people. And we didn't stop until we were inside the Thai place, right between the bar counter and the hostess stand. I turned around and looked through the front window. The man was standing under the last street light on Dunlin. His arms were at his sides, and he was just watching us. He didn't move, didn't turn. Just stood there for maybe 5 seconds, then slowly walked back the way he came, disappearing behind a tree. That was the last we saw of him that night. We told the staff. The hostess offered to call the cops, but Chloe shook her head. "What are we gonna say? A guy looked at us weird?" she said. And honestly, I didn't blame her. We sat down. We ate. I don't remember the food at all. I just remember staring at the glass windows the whole time, half waiting to see that face again. But he didn't come back. Not that night. The man started walking after us, maintaining that same creepy smile and keeping pace about 20 feet behind. Chloe whispered that we should run, and I agreed completely. We broke into a jog and then a full sprint when we realized he was speeding up too. The residential street we were on was completely empty. No other pedestrians, no cars driving by, nobody working in their yards. I remember thinking that if something happened to us here, there would be no witnesses and no help coming. We were both in decent shape from going to the campus gym, but the man behind us seemed determined and wasn't falling back at all. I kept looking over my shoulder and seeing him getting closer. I yelled for Chloe to veer left, hoping to cut through someone's yard to get off the sidewalk. We hopped a low chain fence and tore through a patch of grass, then out the other side onto another street. It slowed him down, but not by much. When I looked again, he was still behind us, still moving fast, not shouting or saying anything, just chasing. Chloe's breathing was getting heavy, and my legs were burning, but adrenaline kept us moving. The sound of his footsteps didn't fade. We passed dark houses with closed curtains, driveways with empty cars. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to knock for help. It was one of those moments where everything around you is quiet, but your heart is hammering so loud that it drowns out the world. We made a quick decision to change our route and head directly toward the shopping center instead of the restaurant. There were always people around the stores and restaurants in that area, even late on Friday nights. As soon as we turned the corner and could see the bright lights and crowds of people ahead, I felt a wave of relief. We ran straight into the main entrance of the shopping center and immediately blended in with all the other shoppers and diners. When I looked back toward the street, the man had stopped at the edge of the parking lot. He stood there for a few seconds, staring in our direction, then turned around and walked back the way he came. We ducked into a frozen yogurt shop near the entrance and stayed there, pretending to browse the toppings bar, hands shaking, eyes darting toward the window every few seconds. The staff probably thought we were high or drunk, but nobody said anything. Chloe kept whispering that we should call the cops, but I told her we didn't have a name, didn't have a plate, nothing to give them. Just a man in a dark sedan with no headlights and a smile that didn't move. We stayed inside the shopping center for about an hour before we felt safe enough to leave, and then we called campus security to escort us back to our car. The security guard was an older guy, probably retired, polite but not very concerned. He told us we did the right thing and said he'd report it to his supervisor, but I got the feeling nothing would come of it. After that night, both Chloe and I signed up for a self-defense class that the college offered, and we started carrying emergency whistles whenever we went out. We also changed our routine completely. No more walking alone on empty streets, and we always made sure other people knew where we were going. We found a student parking pass that let us leave the car in a lot a little closer, even if it meant circling a bit longer to find a spot. Looking back, I'm convinced that man had planned to do something terrible to us, and only stopped because we reached a public area with witnesses. The way he moved, how focused he was, how quiet. It wasn't random. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't confused or lost. He waited for the right place and time. And if we hadn't turned that corner toward the shopping center, I honestly don't think we would have made it to dinner. The thought of what might have happened if we'd stayed on that dark, empty street still makes my skin crawl.